So I'll say good morning again, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Michelle Fideli from First 5 Marin Children and Families Commission, and this is the monthly meeting of the Marin Communications Forum. We're very glad you will be able to join us today as we plan to talk about ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences. I think we certainly struck a chord. We have, I think, about our biggest audience ever, and I think we're going to have a very informative session today, so thank you for coming. A couple things, some of us know maybe quite a lot about this. I know HHS has had several sessions on adverse childhood experiences, which helped me prepare for today. But we're seeing something a lot more intense recently than just the academic work. In the last few months, certainly there has been a lot of tension nationally and locally. And we're seeing things that are, people are talking about urban ACEs and things related to police work and fear of police, fear of stops, seizures, arrests, detention, deportation, shooting, being shot, witnessing that, and a lot of ugliness out there and a lot of worry, fear, stress, and trauma. And so that's a tough subject, but that's what we're going to get to today and see if we can also talk about prevention and resilience and recovery. The other underlying thing also that we have to deal with is poverty, because that certainly exacerbates a lot of the issues that people are going through. And no one believes it because Marin is often cited as the wealthiest county in California, but there is poverty in Marin, and a lot of you I know work with the folks that are living that. Only about 10% of the children in Marin actually live at or below the federal poverty level, but good luck raising a family of 4 on $24,000 in this county. So the numbers go up as you get to 199 and beyond. But the statistics also show that almost 35% of children in Marin live in families who cannot make ends meet. They don't meet the self-sufficiency standard. The experts say it takes over $100,000 to make ends meet in Marin, and we know many of our families do not live in those situations. So with that as a backdrop, all that cheerfulness, we want to begin, and again, I'm very pleased to welcome Jane Stevens from ACES Connection and ACES Too High.
Good morning, everybody. How are you? Great, good. All right. It's a gorgeous morning out there. We are all very fortunate to live in this beautiful place. And not only Marin County, I don't live here, but in California in general. I'm going to talk with you this morning about ACEs science. I know that a lot of you have heard about it, but I'd like to get kind of a hands in the room. How many of you have heard somebody talk about ACEs before? Almost everybody. How many have listened to 2 presentations? And 3? You've forgotten how many? Okay. I'm going to go over ACEs science as we look at it. Then I'm going to, show you what I'm going to do here. Who's using it and what they've learned, and a little bit about self-healing communities, because I think we all want to be living in self-healing communities. So some people call ACEs science, this new knowledge that we have about ourselves, our human behavior, as the theory of everything. Some people call it the unified science of human development. I'm a journalist, so I like to use as few words as possible. I just call it ACEs science. There are 5 parts to this. I know there's 6 strings on there, but good luck at finding a 5th 5 parts to a thread. So maybe there'll be a 6th piece of that this comes along eventually. This is still a knowledge and science that is in flux. We are really just at the beginning of all this. But it is really culture-changing, mind-bending. You can take Facebook and the internet and iPhone and GPS and roll it all into one, and it still isn't as amazingly earth-shattering and potentially changing our culture than this knowledge is. And you all here are at the very forefront of it. I know that sometimes I'll have people say, oh, I think we're at the tipping point. We are nowhere near the tipping point. If you're in this room, you're a pioneer, and I'm really glad to see you here. So the 5 parts that are part of the ACEs science are the ACE study itself, which is the epidemiology, and that's who has ACEs, how many, what the consequences are. Then there's how the toxic stress from ACEs affects the brain, especially children's developing brains. And we know that it does damage and it changes the structure and function of kids' brains. How toxic stress from ACEs affects health, how toxic stress gets passed from generation to generation in epigenetics, and then the good news, which is the resilience research. I'm going to spend a chunk of time here on the bad news parts of these, but we need to have that basis of understanding before we can really move on to implementing this science, because if we don't, we're not going to get as far as we want or make as many changes as we'd like. So first, the ACE study. There were 4 big results from this. I'm not going to go into it deeply since most of you know a lot about it. One is that childhood trauma is extremely common. Nearly 2/3 of the 17,000 mostly white, college-educated people who all had great health care and jobs had at least one type of childhood adversity. 12% had 4 or more. Secondly, there's an unmistakable link between childhood adversity and the onset of chronic disease as an adult, as well as mental illness, violence, being a victim of violence, and many other things. Three, the more types of childhood adversity, the greater the consequences. So you know the 10, and there's the usual suspects of child abuse and neglect. But it's that middle band, the family dysfunction, that a lot of people think are normal, that cause just as much damage as the others. So the third finding was that the more dire the consequences came along as you had an increased ACE score. So not only do you have if you have an ACE score of 4 or higher, you have a 1,200% increased risk of attempted suicide, a 700% increase in the risk of alcoholism, but there's also more broken bones, more marriages, meaning more divorces, more unwanted pregnancies, more prescription drug use, and more obesity. And without intervention, and I want to say that again, without intervention, because a lot of people in this room have high ACEs, just as I do. I have an ACE score of 7. But without intervention, you're likely to lose 20 years off your life if you have an ACE score of 6 or higher. So that's why I want to also say that everybody in this room has had some good resilience factors in their life. Otherwise, you wouldn't be in this room and doing the things that you're doing. And that's important to remember as we're going through this day and this morning and what I'm telling you about. So I'm going to mention 3 really good books. One is this one, The Body Keeps a Score. How many people have read that? A few. This is really a wonderful book. And Bessel van der Kolk says that he took it even further, that there's a 5,000% increase for attempted suicide if you have an ACE score of 6 or higher. And if you compare that to headlines about some environmental issue that is danger that's in the media, you'll hear a lot about that, but you hardly ever hear about this in the media. The other book that I recommend is Born to Love by Bruce Perry, and I'll get to the other one later. So the fourth finding of the ACE study is that ACEs contribute to most of our major chronic health, mental health, economic health, and social health issues. It's pretty remarkable. 32 states and the District of Columbia have done their own ACE surveys, and the results are pretty much the same as the original ACE study. The only difference is in sexual abuse, and I asked Dr. Folletti why that might be, because there's a pretty big difference between the ACE study and any of the BRFA studies, and he said, well, the original ACE study was paper. You know, you were taken a questionnaire to fill out, and you could fill it out in the privacy of your own home, and you knew you were going to be taking it back to your healthcare provider, somebody that you trusted. And the BRFA surveys are a stranger on the phone. So there's some things that people do not want to talk about still. And that's probably the big difference. So let's go back to this ACEs pyramid for a moment. The original ACE pyramid started from that middle blue line up. And as I mentioned, ACEs, knowledge and research is in flux. So these bottom two were added not too long ago. And what this gets to is generational or historical trauma and social conditions, local context, which translates to systems trauma. And you saw from the previous slide, that the 10 ACEs that were measured, those were chosen because of two reasons. One, it was the people who were in a pilot study in Kaiser identified those, as well as there had been research on the individual types of ACEs that they had, that they were looking at, and already shown that there were consequences. But Drs. Anda and Folletti will be the first to tell you that there are many other types of ACEs. And there are now quite a few surveys that are measuring some of those other ACEs. For example, the Philadelphia Urban ACE study included racism, bullying, witnessing violence outside the home, living in an unsafe neighborhood, and involvement with the foster care system. Roseland Pediatrics, which I'm doing a story about in Sonoma County, they have added losing a family member to deportation to theirs. So there are others to add, and some of the ACEs can be proxy for others. So for example, witnessing a mother being abused is one of the ACEs, but witnessing a father abused can be the same. Witnessing a sibling abuse can be the same. Death of a parent, not just losing a parent to divorce or separation. So anybody who's doing an ACE survey in a population should ask what is going on in this population. Ask the people, what has happened in your life that has been traumatizing, and add that in. There's also more recognition about systems trauma. So I mentioned involvement with the foster care system, but I would maintain that if a child goes to a school that is zero tolerance discipline policy, that's also traumatizing for that child, either because they're being accused of something and suspended or expelled, or they're seeing a peer, one of the people in their classroom, undergoing that as well. Certainly involvement with our current law enforcement, our current juvenile justice, our current even medical care system. It's not that there aren't good-hearted people working in any of these systems. There are plenty of good-hearted people working in these systems. It's just that our systems are designed for an old way of thinking and understanding about human behavior. And now you have the opportunity to change all that. There's one other reason that systems are set up the way they are, not just because they're following the old way of thinking about human behavior and how to change human behavior, but also at the convenience of the providers rather than the convenience of the people that they're serving. So violence is just one type of trauma. This is also important. Trauma does not equal only violence. It doesn't equal only neglect. It's just one of many types. And this is another very important part of the ACE study. I would say it's the fifth important part, is that violence is not more or less damaging than divorce, living with a parent who's an alcoholic, being yelled at nearly every day of your childhood, or emotional neglect. Dr. Felitti said, "We studied a whole range of outcomes, emotional, social, financial, biomedical, etc. If someone had an ACE score of 2 or 4 or 7, it didn't matter how you made the ACE score up. It didn't matter. That was unexpected and a surprise." So that means, logically, that our current whack-a-mole approach to how we're trying to address some of our most intractable problems, let's stamp out sexual abuse, let's stamp out physical abuse, let's stamp out emotional abuse, however we do that, doesn't work. Because violence doesn't just lead to violence, emotional abuse can lead to violence. Violence can lead to emotional abuse and then skip a generation, go back to violence again. We have to take a completely different approach to getting our hands around this and preventing it. So also, as each new coping mechanism comes out, we can't do the whack-a-mole approach there because that doesn't work. So prevent methamphetamine use and prevent opioid drug use, prevent sexual exploitation. For all of these efforts, there's not a lot of success to show, because if there's a decrease in one, there's an increase in another if we haven't gone to the root of the root, as Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris says. Stop smoking, increase obesity. Stop methamphetamine use, increase opioid use. Stop physical violence, increase verbal abuse. We're just shifting from one to the other until we get to the root of the root. And we can take a different approach. People have. All right, that was the ACE study. So why do ACEs cause so much damage? This toxic stress. Now, all stress isn't bad. As we know, there's positive stress. There's tolerable stress, like standing in front of 100 people and giving a talk. But then there's toxic stress too. So the positive stress you need to grow and thrive. The tolerable stress actually can make you, if you have resilience factors in your life, can make you stronger. The toxic stress, if it's unrelenting, goes on for years, that can do damage. So what happens when, oops, I didn't mean to go there yet. So what happens when kids experience this toxic stress, especially little kids, they act out or they freeze or they run away, fight, flight, or freeze. They may even appease. There's some people who are saying we should add that to the fight, flight, or fright, the appease piece, which is just you're trying to stay alive and make it through. So you're going to appease whoever is doing the abuse. But when this happens to kids, they act out, they can't sit still, or they turn inward, they sit back in class, they put their heads down their desk. All this is normal response, absolutely normal response to toxic stress. But what happens is these kids can't learn, because if they're in fight, flight, or fright brain, and they're not in thinking brain, this is the part of the brain that's going to be more developed than the thinking brain piece is. And if they don't learn how to trust adults or their peers, then they're not going to trust adults or their peers as they get older. And as they get older, they may find coping behaviors such as drinking, overeating, doing drugs, smoking, as well as overachieving or thrill sports. To them, to us, these are solutions. They're not problems. Nicotine reduces anxiety really well. Food soothes. Some drugs, such as methamphetamines, were the first prescription antidepressant in the 30s and 40s. If you have a relative who fought in the Korean War, almost everybody who fought there was given methamphetamines to get them through. So if you tell people that smoking is bad for them and nicotine works for them to reduce their anxiety, what are they going to do? They're going to keep smoking because they say, well, it's working for me. Because if you're back here and you're not up here, you can't really think about the future too well. You can't think about consequences too well because you're in survival brain. And you're in survival brain for a good reason, because of what's happened to you. It's normal. As I said, I have an ACE score of 7. For a while, I coped by cocaine. That was really wonderful. It took me away from all the frustration and anxiety and depression. And then one day I thought about cocaine and my mouth started watering, so I thought, don't want to do that anymore. So I stopped doing that and I went to skydiving. It worked really well too, but it's not a solution. So the other thing that happens when you have a lot of toxic stress is that even without all the coping behaviors, it's going to start eating away at your body. That's a pretty good way of putting it, because if you're in high stress mode all the time and you've got these hormones coursing around, your immune system is having to do a lot more work than it needs to, and it starts breaking down. It starts affecting every organ system in your body. So that's why people get to be older, and people with high ACE scores have rheumatoid arthritis, have lupus, have celiac disease, have all kinds of things, and they may never have used any drugs or anything to get them there. It's just that your body can't handle this for a really long time. There's a wonderful book. This is the third book I want to tell you about. Donna Jackson Nakazawa wrote a book called Childhood Disrupted. Have any of you read that? A few? Okay. It's Childhood Disrupted, How Your Biography Becomes Your Biology and How You Can Heal. It's a wonderful book.
Can you say the author's name?
Donna Jackson Nakazawa, Nakazawa. If you just Google Childhood Disrupted, you'll find it. She also wrote a book before that called The Last Best Cure, and it was about her journey when she found out about ACEs science and actually ran into a doctor after 20 years of suffering, a doctor who closed her, 3-foot-high file and said, obviously traditional medicine isn't working for you. And this doctor was at Johns Hopkins and said, let's try some other things. And she got a lot better. But I won't give away the punchline. You'll have to go read it. Okay, the fourth part is that the effects of ACEs can change your genes. We're all born with our certain complement of genes. However, these genes turn off and on all day long, hundreds of times a day. But if you're in a stressful situation for years and your stress response is such that you have to be on high alert all the time, well, your genes are going to eventually just have it stay there. And that's something that you can pass on to your children, whether you're a man or a woman. And this can go for generations if there's no intervention. And that's how this plays out in historical trauma. It can go back hundreds of years if there's no intervention. And we certainly know that in our country, with African Americans and with Native Americans in particular, there has been no or very little intervention for generations. And with this knowledge, I hope we don't turn our backs again. Okay, that's all the bad news about trauma, how trauma hurts us. But there's really, 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 really good news out there. Besides the fact that our brains are plastic and our bodies very much want to heal, given that if we are, those opportunities are afforded to us. There are organizations and people who have taken this knowledge and run with it. So we know that there's a lot about information that we have about individual resilience. We know that if you sleep 7 or 8 hours a night, if you eat well, if you live with people who are safe, if you live in a safe neighborhood, if you do mindfulness every day to reduce the stress that you have accumulated every day, if you ask for help when you need it, then you can be healthy and you can recover too. So that's very simple advice, and you hear about it all the time in self-help books and self-help columns. It's harder to do. We know a little bit about building resilient families, which is some of the same thing. One thing that's been very helpful lately is to have parents be educated about their own ACEs. Because when they are, the first thing they usually say is, oh, now my life makes sense to me, and I understand why I did what I did, and how do I not pass this on to my children? But you can't have healthy families without healthy organizations, without healthy communities, without healthy systems. And that includes the organizations that parents work in and for, as well as the ones that serve them. So the frontier of this new knowledge is in organizations and communities and systems. So who's integrating ACEs science? That's one of the stories, one of the things that we do on ACEs Too High. So ACEs Too High is a news site for the general public. We post 1 or 2 stories there a week, and they're focused on the people who are taking this new knowledge and integrating it, and usually they have some data to show for how it's working. And they also can tell their story about what didn't work or what did work as they're moving along. So we've done stories about schools and police departments, courtrooms, physicians, cities and towns that are preventing childhood adversity, and also they're stopping traumatizing already traumatized people. How many of you seen Paper Tigers? Good, good. Okay, might be worth bringing it here again. It's a wonderful, wonderful documentary. I did the story about Lincoln High School in 2012, and Jim Sporletter was the first high school principal to integrate this new knowledge into his school. And remarkably, in a year's time, he had an 85% drop in suspensions. And all that was really was moving from what's wrong with you, you stupid kid, to what happened to you and how can I help you? That's all it was. And putting all the systems in place to do that. He told me that the very first time that he wanted to do this, after he learned about this and he realized it, he said, I was doing everything wrong when it came to disciplining these kids. That his heart was just going like this because, you know, he was going against 25 years of what he'd been told to do in disciplining. And when he did it, you know, this kid had been asked to go down to see him because he'd thrown a chair or something in class and really had lost it, flipped his lid. And this kid was just ready to fight Jim, you know, was ready to say, okay, he's going to yell at me and I'm going to be suspended and I'm going to run out of here. And instead, Jim said to him, Sean, this isn't like you. What happened to you? And Sean burst into tears. He wasn't expecting that. And he said, my dad's an alcoholic. You know, police came last night. My mom's in the hospital. My dad's in jail. I had to get up and take care of the kids and get them to school. I'm really scared. I don't know what to do. You know, Sean's 16. And so Jim said, well, come on down. Let's figure out if your mom's coming home today, or if not, how we can help you and help your brother and sister. That's all it took. That's all it took. Sean calmed down. So after 4 years, and this is not a one-time thing, by the way, if any organization or anybody promises you that they can do a half-day or a one-day trauma-informed training and your organization is going to be trauma-informed, walk the other way. That's just an introduction. It takes 3 to 4 years of concentrated effort, but once you start, you kind of get a wave going, and it'll keep building and going. It's as if people learn about this and they never want to go back to the way it was before. So after 4 years, you can see that their suspensions dropped 90%, and they got expulsions down to 0. 0 in this school, which was an alternative school, and the average ACE score for these kids is 5.5. That's pretty high for 15, 16, 17-year-olds. Also, their test scores, their grades, and their graduation rates went up, which means their hope went up because they were planning for the future, which is pretty cool. So this story went viral. In 2012, when it came out, there were 350,000 page views over a couple of weeks. And at about the same time, Jamie Redford was starting to look into ACEs, and he at first was just going to make the piece about Lincoln just be 10 minutes in his 1-hour documentary about ACEs, and he went up there and changed his mind. He says, no, this has to be a whole story. So if you haven't seen Paper Tigers, I really advise, I think you can get it on iTunes now. It's really a wonderful documentary about 6 kids through a year of their time at Lincoln High School, and it's so much better than my story because you can actually see how these kids change, their faces, their whole demeanor. They go from no hope, my life is worthless, I'm worthless, to I'm not a bad kid. I think I'm having fun. I think I have a future. Here's another example. Dave Lockridge, a pastor, evangelical Christian pastor in Merced, California, learned about this from his wife who does medical education at a hospital. She said, hey, Dave, you should look at this. And he looked at it and he said, I've been doing everything wrong when it comes to helping my most troubled parishioners. I've been telling them to pray harder, and that's not going to do anything. So he closed his church and went back and got a psychology degree and started a workbook, a course and a workbook that went with it that combined the epidemiology of ACEs, the neurobiology of toxic stress, and Bible studies. And he took it to rescue missions. You know, I think the hardest place probably to take this information. And he explained to people about this new knowledge. People who had given up on themselves and society had given up on them. Rescue missions, if you've been there, one step away from the grave for most of these folks. So there was a woman in there, and she was listening to Dave during the course, and this was a woman in her 40s, late 40s at the time, and she had been sexually abused by her uncle when she was 12 or 13 years old, and she went in to tell her parents, and her parents were watching TV, and they said, don't bother us, and don't talk that way. You're just a dirty girl. So what did she think? It must have been my fault, and I'm a dirty girl. So she proceeded to go be a dirty girl in her mind. What that meant to her was joining a gang, doing drugs to cope. She had 3 kids. They were all taken away from her at various stages of her life. She was in and out of jail. She ended up in the rescue mission. She listened to Dave say this, and she looked at him and she said, do you mean I'm not a dirty girl? And he said, you're not a dirty girl. When I met her, she was the administrator of the rescue mission. She was alive and vibrant. She had reconciled with her kids, and she had grandkids, and she had gotten her life back just from this knowledge. So this is knowledge that has to go out everywhere, not just to providers, but to everybody, because it can make a difference. So what Dave told them, explained to them, is We weren't born bad. We weren't responsible for things that happened to us when we were children. We coped appropriately given that we weren't given any healthy alternatives. And we can change. Very powerful. So Dave's course is now being used in rescue missions in quite a few states, and he's made 3 trips to Africa. I'm now working with the Rwanda Reconciliation Commission because they were noticing that there were quite a few people who were having a very hard time still recovering from Rwanda. And dollars to donuts, those people have high ACE scores, so you have to take a little bit different approach. So there are trauma-informed judges, trauma-informed courts, including Safe Babies courts, that have completely changed how they work with families. I don't think there's any Safe Babies courts here in California, but I sure hope there will be. Instead of always separating babies who come to the attention of child welfare from their parents, these Safe Baby courts provide wraparound services for parents, siblings, extended family. Whatever that parent needs, they get. And the judge is on top of that. The judge has been educated about ACEs, and the judge has the ability to say, all right, we're meeting not every 6 months, we're meeting every 4 weeks or 6 weeks, and we're going to get this family healed. The family's going to heal themselves. We're going to provide the services for them. So they offer counseling, medical care, employment services, housing services, transportation. The results are profound. In Safe Babies courts that help children and their parents, 99% of the kids suffer no further abuse after a year. In Portland, pediatricians have started screening the parents of 4-month-old babies for the parents' ACEs because they know that's the best way to do prevention. As I mentioned earlier, I'm finishing a story about Roseland in pediatrics in Santa Rosa. They're doing the same thing. And as I also mentioned, that these parents want to do whatever they can not to pass their ACE scores on to their kids. This addiction doc is named Dan Sumrock. He works in McKenzie, Tennessee, as well as in Memphis, Tennessee. He's director of this Center for Addiction Science at University of Tennessee. But he has, I think it's more than 1,200 patients now that he has educated about ACEs since he learned about it 2-3 years ago. And he says that addiction shouldn't be called addiction. It should be called ritualized, compulsive comfort seeking. Ritualized, compulsive comfort seeking. And he says that this is as normal as a response to adversity experienced in childhood, just like bleeding is a normal response to being stabbed. So why are we shaming people if it's a normal response? He says, treat it like a chronic disease. He said, I would never tell a diabetic who's comes in the day after Thanksgiving and their blood sugar is way high and say, give me back your insulin, go away from here, I'm not going to treat you anymore. You know, people who have high ACE scores have gone through hell in their lives, and they're going to be triggered as they go through life. And so why wouldn't you want to keep helping them? You might take 3 steps back, but you're going to take 4 forward. You know, it's like, let's keep going here. Let's be a helping organization. He's having pretty good results. This is a family center. This is in Nashville, and they do the same thing. They're training all their parents about ACEs, and this is the very sad thing that made my heart stop when I saw it, is how many of these parents have ACEs. Very, very high ACE scores. So no wonder they're suffering. No wonder they're having a hard time. But it takes nothing away from understanding a parent's resilience if you tell them about ACEs. A lot of people say, oh, don't give them that bad news. But you need to give them that understanding so they understand that why they're triggered when their kid hits them. And they hit back without even being able to think about it because it's gone straight to their amygdala, that response. So if you start explaining how things happening, then parents can start saying, oh, I should watch out for this. Maybe I can get some training and some help to prevent it. And I'll know why I lost it. And I can apologize and do something right then and there rather than feeling hopeless. So it puts into perspective just how resilient parents are when they get to this point. ACEs is also called NEAR. That stands for Neurobiology, Epigenetics, ACEs, and Resilience. And there's a group of people who integrated this into home visiting programs in Washington, and they put this module up on the Thrive WA site. And I highly recommend it for any home visitors or anybody who wants to learn how to integrate this into their organization, because they have dialogues in there for people who work with people who have high ACE scores. So you know what to say and how to respond, and how your own ACEs may be triggered. But they said that learning about ACEs is a social justice issue. Parents have the right to know the most powerful determinant of their children's future health, safety, and productivity. So educating people about ACEs science is really important. It engages the people you serve by helping them understand their own behavior. And if you understand it too, it helps you understand your own behavior and your interaction, your reaction to the people that you're helping. It empowers people. It changes their understanding of others' behavior and their own. And it opens a channel for them to tell you what they need. You know, I think too often we've gone in and said, oh, I think what you need is this, 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 and this. And so we're going to institute that without ever asking, well, what do you need? You know, people are pretty clear when they're having troubles about what they need and when they need it and when they're not ready for things. And this includes ACEs. There are some people who are not ready to talk about their ACEs, and that's fine. That's fine. It can be threatening, and that's fine. People come to this at their own speed. And that is city councilors as well as people that you're helping. And you have to respect that, because usually when people go, whoa, I don't want to know about that, it's because they're scared. And so you just want to say, okay, you know, here's somebody who's doing something with it. When you're ready, let's talk. So we all swim in the same ACEs ocean. We all breathe the same ACEs air, every one of us. If we're not affected by this, then someone in our family or our friend, certainly someone in our community, we're all in this together. I'm old enough to remember when people didn't talk about cancer. It was just the C word, you know, and people who had cancer just disappeared from life. And so the more that we can talk about this and make it the normal thing that it is, the better. There are some communities that are doing that, and there's a community, someone here is a trauma-transformed person, so you met Laura Porter, who was director of the Washington Family Policy Council, which was a real pioneering organization in Washington State. They took this information into 42 communities across the state, and for the communities that were using this model that they introduced for 8 or more years, it reduced the rates of 7 major social problems all at the same time: child abuse and neglect, family violence, youth substance abuse, dropping out of school, teen pregnancy, and youth suicide. And why I say all at the same time, that's important. You know, it wasn't let's go after youth suicide today and let's go after teen pregnancy over here. If you understand this, you see it's all the same issues, and we have to approach it a different way. The results were stunning, as they always are when organizations implement this. The per year avoided caseload costs in child welfare, juvenile justice, and public medical costs associated with births to teen mothers were calculated to be over $601 million over that time period, an average of $120 million a year. And that was a public investment of just $3.4 million a year. So for the people who are persuaded by the money, dig out those data for that. And that would be your city councilors or your board of supervisors or your superintendents or whatever. Get the data and the money and understand that that's the language that a lot of people have to speak. So there are now quite a few communities around the U.S. that are starting to integrate ACEs. And so that's the other part of ACEs Connection Network is ACEs Connection, which is a social network. And what we do in ACEs Connection, a lot of people call it the Facebook for the ACEs movement, but it has many more bells and whistles than that. It's really there to support and provide tools and help the ACEs and resilience building initiatives in neighborhoods and cities and towns. So we tell stories on here, the same stories that aren't ACEs Too High are also on here, but anybody can tell their own stories on here. And we have many people of the more than 14,500 people on here now who are doing just that, whether it's the stories about their organizations or their own personal journeys. And people come from every walk of life. It was so neat to hear everybody introduce themselves in here because you come from so many different walks of life, and that's what ACEs Connection is. So at the heart of the ACEs Connection are the groups, and this is a Sacramento County ACEs connection, and you'll see Danielle's picture there. Danielle was the group manager there before she so wonderfully agreed to work with us as the community facilitator for the San Francisco Bay Area counties. So on these groups, it's like a mini ACEs connection. So you have your complete own place on there. And the local resilience initiatives that are using this, they can have their own blog, their own videos, their own archives for their files, for their meeting minutes, their calendar, you name it, you can put it here, and it's for everybody to use in your community. There are probably about 20 California counties now that are using ACEs Connection, and more than that outside of California. So for all of you in Marin, we invite you to start a group on here, and Danielle will be your guide and provide you the tools to help you. We're actually, after having watched the groups and worked with groups over the last 5 years, we're actually rolling out a whole new suite of tools, all free, for groups to do this. And it's free because we're supported by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation and the California Endowment. And so I think that the groups that are using, the local initiatives that are using the groups are really making a lot of progress. It seems like Sacramento has, but Danielle can tell you more about that. So ACEs Connection works like this. You know, anybody can reach out to anybody else. Any group can reach out to anybody else. Best practices are shared. Worst practices are shared. We want to move this fast, and there's nothing faster than being able to move it through a network like this. So our goal is that the entire community integrates trauma-informed and resilience-building practices based on ACEs science. We're set up now in our traditional understanding of human behavior to take a blame, shame, and punishment approach. It's like, why don't you stop smoking, you stupid person? We've given you, 50 years of information here, and you're still not doing it. That doesn't work, as we're learning. And so we can change our approach to try and get people change their behavior, their unhealthy behavior, their criminal behavior, their unwanted behavior, just by understanding why people do what they do. And so with this knowledge of unified science, of ACEs science, the theory of everything, the neuroscience, we can move from blame, shame, and punishment to understanding, nurturing, and helping people heal themselves. So there's one other thing that I want to leave you with. I've shown you how organizations and communities are taking this information. There's many more examples on ACEs Too High and on ACEs Connection. We have enough evidence to show that this works, so there's no reason not to do this. It may be brain science, but it's not rocket science. And we can all be trauma-informed and build resilience. I know that you've heard the research that says if a child has just one healthy relationship with an adult, that it makes all the difference in the world to that child. So I've been thinking about that a lot, and I thought, why are we making kids search for that one adult? Why are we settling for that? We have the understanding now to make sure that all of our organizations and all of our communities can create places so that adults who have high ACEs can recover and can heal, so that they can all be, we can have a community of adults where all adults can be those for kids. So a kid doesn't have to run around searching for and hoping that they'll find that one caring adult. They can all be caring adults. And that way we can grow healthy kids and even healthier communities. So thank you for that. There's also some resources that I'm going to show you right there. And we're now going to show you. Okay, if you want to take, what I'm going to do after a couple of questions, if you have questions, that we're going to do an anonymous, completely voluntary survey of the room about, to answer the ACE study questions. So you can, as I was saying, you know how we all breathe the same ACEs air and we all swim in the same ACEs ocean, that we'll do that, and we'll do it by phone so that you can see how that works. But first, are there any questions after all this rambling that I did this morning?
Any questions or comments?
Question back there.
Oh, yes, ma'am.
It's probably just a real simple question. When did this, when was it developed and first initiated?
So the ACE study came about in, it was actually done in 1995 and 96 and 98 was the first publication. About the same time, Bruce McCune was starting, well actually he did a little bit before then, was starting to understand about the neurobiology of toxic stress. A little before then, SAMHSA was understanding about trauma-informed care and how that really made a difference in organizations, and combining substance abuse with mental health before they were completely separated and they brought them together. Most of us could say, duh. And then epigenetics piece was done a little bit after that. But what was interesting is that all these people who were doing this separately started finding out about each other. And they, as Dr. Felitti said, they were keeping each other's research in their pockets, you know, so they could start to see how it was all married together. And now it's all married together. Since 2011, I would say, is when it, because that's when the medical community also had been doing a lot of research to show that that if you had IA scores, there was a relationship between that and skin cancer, between that and arthritis. You know, they just had done hundreds of these, and they identified what it was in the immune system functioning that was leading to all that. And so I would say that that's about the time it's all started coming together, for sure. Oh, no. Sorry, then we'll come to you.
No, go ahead. Thank you. Essentially, I think what you're saying, if I'm interpreting it correctly, is that almost all of this is stress-related, and it creates more stress, which perpetuates the problem, et cetera.
It is indeed all stress-related. And the important thing that the ACE study showed is that it's what we think of as normal that actually does the same damage as the things that we were identifying as shouldn't be happening to kids. You know, so divorce, living with a parent who's depressed or has other mental issues, emotional abuse. A lot of people think that, you know, yeah, so what if I was yelled at every day when I was growing up, I should just, you know, pull myself up by my bootstraps and just keep going. But that did damage. So it's those normal things that we have to pay attention to, too.
Is anybody in your world tracking and lobbying institutions that train teachers to make this part of their understanding about how to change institutions that deal with children every day?
As a matter of fact, I would say that the education community is probably the strongest in this change right now. There is a huge national meeting that's taking place in St. Louis in June, and it's sold out like that, so they're having another one in November. There probably are, I would say, 400 or 500 schools now across the country that have made some progress, like Lincoln has, into changes. Many of them have gone through the 3 years and now have systematized everything they're doing. But there's actually quite a bit happening here in California. So if you go to ACES Connection, and there's a group there called ACES in Education, because we also have interest-based groups that has a lot of information about that.
Hi, Katie Foster. I work at the community school right now, and I just wanted to. I have to leave because we had a situation at our school last week, but I wanted to promote a free screening of Jamie Redford's new movie, Resilience, the biology of stress and the science of hope, and we're screening it for free Monday, 6 p.m. at Marin County Office of Education. That's at 111 Las Galinas Parkway.
Great.
Next Monday, the 22nd of May, at 6 p.m.
It's a terrific documentary. I highly recommend it.
We know in our society that there are people who, despite the science, will deny things like climate change. So for the folks who are wedded to a shame and blame model of criminal justice, juvenile justice methodology, have we evolved to a point yet where we can move the conversation forward with that? Like, what are we doing to get people ready to make that cultural shift that allows them not to see this as just a soft response to crime or behavior or school problems and so forth, but really understand this science is real, actual, and the solutions are evidence-based in a way that we really need to make those shifts both in resources and practices?
That's a good question. It's happening at all different levels, certainly on the community level as well as states. Not enough at the national level, although there's some push there. That goes back to some people who are just stuck where they are for whatever reason. And the only thing that will move them is data. And when you have data that says, New Jersey, I'm making this up, but what I'm not making up about New Jersey is they changed their whole juvenile justice system through the Annie Casey Foundation's push on diverting, doing early diversion for kids, and they saved hundreds of millions of dollars. You can't argue with that. And you can't argue with having to shut down a lot of juvenile detention facilities because you don't need the beds, and that crime isn't going up. The other thing is that you got to vote in people who understand this. Now, this ACEs science is apolitical and it's acultural. This is happening all around the world. And many countries, probably 5% of our membership comes from other countries. The state that has actually moved ahead, furthest ahead on this, doing things at the state agency level is Wisconsin. Because of Tonette Walker, who's married to Scott Walker. This is where Pillow Talk helps. and she learned about all this ACE stuff and said, "This is the bee's knees. We've got to change all this." And I don't know if there's one person in Wisconsin who doesn't know about ACEs science. 7 state agencies there were directed by Scott Walker to themselves become trauma-informed. They have gone through year 1, they're about to enter year 2. And this isn't just for their services, because 2 of the state agencies are economic development agencies. This is how do we become trauma-informed for ourselves internally? What are we doing that is going against this science? And they've made some pretty remarkable changes already. So I would say we just have to keep pushing. If you know about this, if you understand it, if you're working in it, start building these networks across your community so you can start influencing other people. You know, eventually the people who hold on to the old way are going to be in the minority. But we've got to make them in the minority, and they're not yet. There are 30,000 cities and towns in this country, 4,000 counties. I want all of them on ACES Connection so that we can change how we're having our kids grow up.
Thank you, Jane.
All right.
Can we,
Thank you. Thank you. So this is completely voluntary, but the reason I would like to do it with you all is because it does show that our ACE score in the room. And I think that's usually been pretty revealing. One of the things that Drs. Folletti and Anda always told me, that they used to go out and they used to do the ACE score on paper wherever they went. And they said that and they made hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of presentations before this started catching on. As I said, the first article came out in 1998, and they went on the road right away, trying to tell people about this stuff. And the organization that had the highest ACE scores was it was an association. I believe it was psychotherapists and psychologists, which is not very surprising. But I want to show that it's in a group of where people are in the healing professions. Excuse me. People come to healing professions for a reason. You know, hurt people, but hurt people also help people. And so that's why the scores tend to be higher, but who knows? We'll see. So how this works is, you're going to text the words ACES Connection, all caps, to 22333. Pretend like 22333 is a friend. So you just go, you know, your text is going to 22333, and the words that you're texting to that 22333 is ACES Connection, all caps. And you'll get a message back saying you're in or something like that. Does anybody get anything? Yep. If you're having issues, find someone who's younger than you and ask. That's what I always do. All right, so I'm going to do this too.
and everyone saw that this is anonymous and voluntary, right? Yes.
Absolutely anonymous and voluntary. And there's no way that this software can detect who you are or connect you or anything like that. All they're doing is registering a T or an F. If you get, I'm just writing so I get in. Hold on a second. Okay. So is everybody in and who wants to do this and has, you've joined Jane Stevens' session, ACES Connection, get that prompt back? All right. So, no? Okay. If you get a not session available, try it again because I just opened this. And then? Yeah. Yeah, it's 10 questions, and then we're going to ask you what your ACE score is, and we'll get an ACE score for the room as well. So it'll be the 10 questions from the ACE study. And to answer yes or no, you're going to put T or F, true or false. Okay? It doesn't matter if it's uppercase or lowercase? No. I don't think so. No one's ever asked me that. Yeah, you should be. Okay, so now do a true and false to this question. Did a parent or other adult in the household often or very often swear at you, insult you, put you down, or humiliate you? T or F, yes. Yeah, you just put T or F, text it. Text a T or an F. Hold on a second. Okay, there you go. Now do it. Sorry, hadn't registered. So, T or an F?
Now we're getting the message it's not activating after answering that question. All right. Same question again.
Okay, now do it. Now do T or F. Yeah, just this.
So is this the answer?
Yeah, so this is supposed to be answering, showing you what the room is right now. Right, yeah, so put the answer in. Hold on a second, I'm going to mess around with this. All right, I've turned it off and on in many different ways, so if you haven't turned a T or an F in, try it now. It's acting a little strange. It hasn't really done this before. I'm going to move to the next question and see if there's any issue.
Could you give have people raise their hands if they're not connected? I didn't get the link.
Okay, this question, did an adult or person at least 5 years older than you ever touch or fondle you or have you touch their body in a sexual way? So this is sexual abuse.
And this applies to anyone in your home?
Yes, anybody in your home that was 5 years older than you. It can even be your extended family. T or F? What are you getting? Are you getting it's working? Not open. Okay, now see what happens. It's very strange because it's telling me the opposite of what is happening. That little mark is supposed to tell me that it's off, but it's on, so we'll go with that. And on the previous one, that first question was emotional abuse, and it was about 34%. We don't know how accurate that is since we were having some issues there, but the original CDC poll was 11%, actually 10.6 had emotional abuse. Okay, so this is sexual abuse on the ACE study was 20.7. So we have about 37. All right, I'll move on to the next question. Oh, I'll wait. Did you often or very often feel that no one in your family loved you or thought you were important or special? True or false? Okay. This is emotional neglect. Yes, ma'am.
I was rolling here and now I'm getting a message you can't believe more.
Locked and unlocked it, so try it again. But otherwise, we need to keep going so that we have time for everyone.
So that's about 27% yes. And the CDC study was 14.8, so 15%, so it's higher here. And I can send these when it's all done to you. Did you often or very often feel that you didn't have enough to eat, had to wear dirty clothes, and had no one to protect you? What's interesting is that most people that I show this to in a group like this, that's the one that comes out at the very bottom, and that's because if you understand, what is it, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you've got to be fed and clothed and housed if you're going to get any kind of start in life. So the ACE study was in physical neglect was 10%. Just about the same. Was a biological parent ever lost to you through divorce, abandonment, or other reason? Before 18. The ACE study was 23.3%. You see it's a lot higher here. This is witnessing your mother being abused or stepmother being abused. I would say if you witnessed your father being abused, that you could also say yes here. In the ACE study, it was 12.7%.
I have a question on the previous question. Does that mean that when you said lost to you, is that like you don't know where they went or disappeared from your life? Or are you talking about just divorce and separation where you're not living with them?
Both. So this is also higher at 20%. Did you live with anyone who was a problem drinker or alcoholic or who used street drugs? The ACE study was 27%. See how normal all this is? Isn't it amazing? Was a household member depressed or mentally ill, or did a household member attempt suicide? The ACE study was 19.4%. Did a household member go to prison? I remind you again, if you're in this room, you're resilient. You've had resilient factors in your life. There is a resilience questionnaire on ACEs Too High, and I would encourage you to take that. We also have in ACEs Connection in our resource center, we have a bunch of different resource surveys. I would encourage you to take that as well. Incarcerated family member in the ACE study was almost 5%. Did a parent or other adult in the household often or very often push, grab, slap, or throw something at you? This is physical abuse. Wait. Okay. The ACE study was 28.3. And the last question, how many ACEs do you have? And you can put 0 to 4 as soon as it comes up. Or sorry, A, B, C, D, or E, that's 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. A is 0, B is 2, C is 3, D is 4, no, 0, 1, 2, D is 3. Sorry, A is 0, B is 2. Sorry. I'm dangerous. B is 1. C is 2, D is 3, E is 4 or more. I hear people saying, "Can I take back my letter?" So the CDC ACE study, 4 or more was 12%. California now 18% is 4 or more over the whole state. This group is 29. Take care of yourselves.
So do we have totals, or does that come up later?
That comes up later, and I can give it to you later.
Great.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Jane. Mel, hi. Is Dr. Lear? Oh, hi there. He is. I couldn't see him over there. Great. So we are ready to move on. And now I would like to welcome from Marin City Health and Wellness, Dr. Karuna Leary and Rolanda Wilkins. While they're coming up, I'll just say, I'm sure you've had a chance to go through your packet, but the ACEs study as well as the Resilience study is in there, and several other informative pieces, including kidsdata.org, which has a lot of content on mental health statistics, and you can look that up by county. All of the documents in your packet are available electronically, and you can email me later if you would like to receive those. I've contacted most of you by email, but it's michelle@first5marin.org, using the number 5, michelle@first5marin.org. And a question? We are videotaping, and we're creating a YouTube channel, so I will email all the registrants back and give you the address for that. It'll take a week or so. Also, we'll have the PowerPoint available. And thank you. Dr. Leary and Rolanda, thank you.
Do you want us to stand up
However
here,
you like to
sit
be.
down?
You just sit? Have this and I'll bring you one more. Sure.
Go ahead. You don't have a seat. Hello, you guys. I'm Dr. Leary, Karuna Leary. I'm the director at Marin City Health and Wellness for Behavioral Health. And I guess we're going to sit down. I think it'll be a little more comfortable. Thank you for having us. So what we're going to focus on today, well, I'm going to start first and just give a little bit about what we're doing in Marin City and kind of our mindset and how we approached ACEs, and then moving forward, how we approached our intervention and work with ACEs. We've got kind of a unique situation in Marin City compared to the rest of Marin. It's its own little community. It's mostly African American, and that's what our focus is on. Now, we see everyone. We see people from all different cultures. So when I first heard about ACEs, I had a lot of different thoughts about it. At first, being a therapist, I was intrigued. I mean, it helps us look at all these different ways we're impacted before we even realize it, and then how our behaviors are shown and how it impacts our emotional and overall just beingness. It also can take some of that blame and stigma off us always having to make the right choices and seeing a lot of the times there are things that were put in the way before we even had this consciousness of what we were doing that kind of put us behind a bit. The other way I thought of it, though, was if somebody told me, well, actually, if you have over 4, you might be in for a really bad life. I don't really like finding these things out and then thinking, well, what am I supposed to do about it? So we're in Marin City, you look at this, the original ACEs study, and you think, okay, well, was this in some inner city where there's a lot of violence and a lot of things going on, and we would expect people to have 4+ on this scale. But instead, what you find out is it's educated white people from middle class. And so you're thinking, if this high of percentage of people are dealing with 4+ ACEs, and these are all the results that can happen because of 4+ ACEs, then what are the rest of the people supposed to do that are already in an environment that we can guess most likely is going to be worse off than an educated middle-class white person? So we find out this ACEs study. Now, do we welcome people to our clinic and tell them it's pretty likely that you're at 4+, you're going to have all kinds of medical issues, emotional issues, good luck with that, and send them on their way? And so one of the things that we had to think about a lot when we we start to look at this study is, if we assume a lot of people in our community, and not to stigmatize, but we assume that just because of the resources that are there and the history, that they're going to be at 4+, then what do we do about that? Well, one of the things that a lot of you in here, I think, might be therapists or relate dealing in working with people. So we like to tell everybody, check this out. We found this out. This is going to make everything better because it's not your fault that things are messed up. But unfortunately, in the community that we're in, there's not so much excitement about just being told by other people what's wrong with you. So we have to be really careful about how we give this information out. I mean, knowledge is power, but how it's given out can really change things. So from my point of view, and I have to be really culturally sensitive. I'm in a Black community, I'm a white therapist, that's the reality of it. So if I just look like the person that's telling people in this community, hey, look, you guys are gonna all have a lot of problems. Don't worry, we can diagnose you. It won't really be your fault. Also medical issues too. It's not just that you're gonna be crazy, but you're gonna have a lot of health issues. This isn't really gonna be helpful. So what do? We start talking to people about stress. We start talking to people about the reality of what they're facing. And we come to them with ideas of how as a community do we provide you with support? How as a community do we give your family more support? How do we give your kids more support? And so now we're talking to people about the reality of a tough environment, but solutions. So instead of bringing people in and diagnosing so much, this is a thing that therapists like to do. It's really kind of, if I'm going to be just blunt about it, it's kind of a white culture thing. Come in, talk about your problems to your therapist, and you get to fix all of them. Well, in the Black community, and in a lot of communities that are non-white, the idea of going to a therapist is crazy. It's what crazy people do. You don't go to figure out your issues to become enlightened. You go when you have really bad problems. So in our community, what we're trying to do is make Marin City Health and Wellness Center a place where people come to get healthy, a place where they come to talk about their stress, a place where we focus on what are your strengths, who's in your family that can help you, who are your friends that can help you, who are the teachers that can help you. And so we're offering solutions. So how we tell people about ACEs is it has to be done very carefully. We don't want to just say, look, you have all these problems and it's going to be bad. Instead, we say, we know it's stressful here. We can come together as a community and help each other. We focus more on the resiliency aspect of things. If we already know people are at a deficit, then what's the other side of that? What's the resilience? What's the community as a resilience? What are the clinicians that are in the community as a resilience? The parents, the teachers. And so we have to be really careful when we start talking about this because parents do need to know. We want them to know, hey, your kids are going to be better off if they have this support, if they have this structure. But it's okay if they haven't up to this point because we're here, we're looking at it. The change happens when we look at what's happened and what do we do about it. And this is where we have our programs that we've started to implement in Marin City that are getting teens involved, empowering teens, trying to get parents involved. That's a little bit tougher, but a lot of the times you empower teens, they get their parents involved. We get programs going that aren't focused on what's wrong with you, but hey, just come out and build and create with your child, and through that resiliency comes. We're not focusing on, well, now that you have a +5 or a 7 or an 8, you're probably gonna get COPD. You know, your kid's probably gonna smoke or be in jail. Instead, we look at, okay, this is where we're at, and this is what we can offer you. And us as clinicians, we also have to stop looking at everything as, how do we diagnose things? What's the problem? I mean, the difference between depression or anxiety, it might matter for that one person, but if we step back and just say, whatever one someone's dealing with, it's gonna make their life tough. And a lot of the time I ask people when they're given a bipolar disorder or schizophrenia, do you even know what that is? No. It's just a name that was given to somebody that has a stigma that holds heavy over them. So we're trying to change the air, the culture of Marin City, that crazy people don't come to therapy. People that are stressed come, people that just need coping, people that need somebody to talk to. that we're gonna drive ourselves crazy when we don't have these resources, when we don't find ways of becoming resilient. So I wanna pass the mic over and allow you to share some of the things that we're doing in Marin City and in the surrounding areas that are really empowering both the kids in our communities as well as the parents and just the community as a whole. So thank you.
Good morning. Y'all can hear me well? Okay, I can hear my. Okay, so I'm Rolanda Wilkins, and I do something called Girl Power in Marin City. And just to give you a little history, how I got to Marin City, I do this work all over the country, and then I also get a chance to take young people around the country and then go into other countries and look at what they're doing with their girls and women around wellness, and particularly people of African descent, because our stories in America is a little different. I started using the ACEs survey, and I also work a lot in Sacramento. That's my base. The ACEs survey, I find that it's a pretty good tool to use. Everything I get is a tool. Because when you're working with African Americans, it's a little bit of different spin. Like, I could have answered yes to all of those questions, and inside my culture, just because somebody pushed me don't mean that they're abusing me. It's a little different with black folks. The second thing is we have this thing called slavery in America. And that's another big backdrop. So when we're talking about these things, and then you start throwing people of pigment or melanin involved, and particularly black people, that really changes the way the ACEs look. So for instance, when I was sitting here listening to the presentation, I think about the trauma that has been in my DNA since my ancestors got here. One of the things I do with black folks in particular, young people, I get their DNA done. Because the biggest trauma that we have is that we really don't know who we are. So we'll be 1 minute, oh, I'm part this, I'm part that, I'm part this, I'm part rug, I'm part dog. You get your DNA back and you're just black and white. I did mine. I grew up my whole life with Blackfoot Indian. I sweat keep, I firewalk, I do all of that traditional stuff because my grandma was supposed to be a Blackfoot Indian. Got my DNA back. I was 78% African, 22% European, and most of that was Britain. Well, my last name is Wilkins, and that's English, but I'm not British. I mean, I can't go get, the Queen is not gonna see me that way. So I looked at the survey and I realized in my community, I had to take a different approach. I had to look at the root cause of why we're feeling this way. Why is it that when we look at each other, we don't necessarily treat each other the way we should be treating each other? Because a lot of the things that we learned that's reflected in this ACEs survey came straight up out of slavery. To be inside of a culture where you cannot be yourself, like I'm sitting here with a head wrap on, but if I was really trying to get a job at the government, I could not walk up in there with a head wrap on. Now maybe now, because we have a lot of Muslims here, now people could wear their hijabs, but I'm saying, because I also study a lot of history, in the 70s when people started to discover they were African, imagine being somewhere and not knowing that you were from Africa when you got kidnapped or sold or whatever title we're gonna use for it. Then you discover you were African, so you have to rediscover yourself. So when I'm working with my girls and I'm looking at that ACEs survey, I try to get them to understand that this is really deeper than just you. Like, people can't give you what they don't have. So it's kind of like really identity is at the root of that. When you're somewhere, you don't have a language to speak. So you'll see black folks and we'll be like, you know what I'm saying? You don't even know what we're saying. And that's why it sits over here laughing, because that's our way of recreating culture and language, because we lost that. That's definitely reflected in the ACEs survey. One of the things I did not see on the ACEs survey is death. And when you're in the black community, Big Mama died from diabetes, you know, or your daddy from hypertension. That's not reflective in there. It's not always about death in terms of people killing each other up, but how we live could be suicidal. Not that somebody's attempting to jump off. Or even with the mental health piece on there, I always say if you live in America and you black, you definitely got mental health issues. They have to tell your child not to be themselves in order to go to school, to get a job, to make it around the people. Being in other cultures that are intrusive on you, that's a mental health issue where you can't be yourself, where you can't come as yourself, when people are making fun of your language. And I have a lot of different slangs, I'm around a lot of different people, but I have to really work on, am I saying the correct words? Like, I tend to say ask, and I don't say it correctly, and I have my friends that have more British influence, like, it's not ox, you know, and I'm like, well, dude, like, are you serious? But I'm saying all of that is reflective in the ACEs survey. So when I'm working with girls in my community, we use this as a tool. It really is just a tool. You know, it could be used in any way you see it, but I tend to look at it, how are we going to regain our culture back so you feel okay about yourself? No matter where you go, whoever you talk to, be proud of who you are. You don't have to claim to be 50 million things. Just be who you are. Look at those things. We talk about resiliency. I know that I'm a descendant of people who survived one of the most harsh things that have ever happened in human history, in my book. So I feel like I'm still here. And so, that's how I look at the ACEs. I use that to track it. My number was like a 7. It could be an 8. One of them I was like, no, and they don't think they really meant, because that's what you do when you don't want to be like, this is a high number. I don't want to get, see, I'm doing it right now. Y'all know what that means when you, But I also sit here with Sister Harriet Tubman pin on me because I'm remembering that I'm a part of a continuum. And when I use this ACEs survey, I try to use it in the cultural content, not trying to be. I love the way Karuna explained that because it's really hard to work in a community where you want to help, but then you don't want to push your stuff on people because you're with people whose stuff have been pushed on and they've been pushed down. And then what we do, we kind of start fighting each other. And we don't even realize that we're doing it. So for some people, this is like a new science. To me, I'm looking at my ancestors when I look at this ACEs survey. But I also looked at the way they tried to teach us to love each other and how to say good morning. So when I greet people, even if I don't know you, hey, beautiful, hey, handsome, hey, good. I use all those prefixes. I grew up with elders because I think they were older. Maybe they forgot my name. But it made me feel good when they greeted me that way. Like I knew I had to give a different response. So we have to kind of teach people, how do we begin to be with each other again? How can you have a goal that's attainable? When you have people making you feel like your expectation is, it's okay, you're supposed to be underclass. Like it's a way of saying that to people without saying it the way I just said it. So I use the ACEs to basically empower my young people to basically, build on their strengths. Like when I'm talking with young people, and one area we skip over a lot is the crack era, that totally changed Black communities. Totally. I don't know one person I've ever worked with that have a grandmother or brother or someone who hasn't been impacted by crack, even if your grandmother take on more children or your mama take on more children because somebody's parents is out in their addiction. Then we have people who are now years clean on that, and they're still trying to figure out, how do I go back to my children and make amends for me not being there? That's a part of the ACEs. Like how do you look at that? If your score is a 10, but you made it out of it, you didn't die. How do I regain that in my children so that the DNA piece about how your DNA is measured, that's absolutely Black people. That's why I know that that's me. So I know from slavery, because you have a gene in you that's a fight or flight, when you're not fighting or flighting, it's normal. For Black people, that's a scientific fact that I learned, it remains that way. So even when you look at us giving birth, a Black woman who is educated is more likely to lose her child than a white woman that's uneducated that smokes cigarettes. These are real stats. And so I'm saying that to say, when you have a tool like this, you have to, depend on who you're talking to. Because I'm not mad when white people are talking to white people and then you use a certain language. That I get. I'm not telling you not to do that. But I'm saying when you go to include the other people of pigment or melanin, and notice I didn't say of color because white is a color, and y'all included in this too. So I tend to use words of pigment or melanin when you're talking to other communities. Then you want to put that backdrop in, because when you don't, it's like you try to make them be you and they're not you, which makes people sick. I'm just going to be so honest. I don't know no other way of putting it. And it's not a bad thing. It's just that we have to, in America, as we look at our issues historically, for some reason we want to make everybody generic, and we're not generic. We have to recognize that, hey, in the Black community, these are issues. Why does infant mortality happen in our community as opposed to in other communities as high as it is? So I'm looking at that with the ACEs. If you didn't like people kicking and slapping you, then don't you do it. I work with a lot of young people, and they always say, Ms. Rowe, I like that you keep it real, that you look at me and you see me as a human being, and then sometimes you give me the answer, because sometimes I really don't have the answer. I don't know how to ask for help except for get loud and do whatever, because that's the culture I come from. And it doesn't mean that that person doesn't deserve help, but we have to figure out how to include people and respect their culture and their background as we look at this ACEs survey, especially the one about kicking and slapping. It's like, well, I don't know, I got beat with a shoe before. Anybody got beat with a shoe before? Oh, okay, I thought I was by myself. I was like, oh, Lord, I know my mama loved me, but maybe she had a shoe. But I also know whoopings come straight out of slavery. When you whoop people, and if you're really from the old school, you would go get a branch off it felt like the root to me, but you go get a switch and you braid it up, and that's what you use to whoop people with. Well, that's straight up out of slavery. And so it's a way when I'm talking to a parent that may be their background, I don't make them feel bad, but I try to get them to see that there's other ways of disciplining your child. And a lot of it starts from, how you talk to your child and the things you let them do, they get away with. And then when they're 15 as opposed to 5, it's not cute anymore. So it's like you have to really, but I've never met a parent who did not want the best for their child. but just didn't know how to give it to them, how not to pass on. You can't help the things in your DNA that you pass on, but you can absolutely help the things that we have in this survey to not do and being resilient. And it's okay to say, you know what, we did some things in our tradition, it wasn't good, it didn't serve me well. Don't mean I don't love my ancestors, it doesn't mean I don't love my elders, but I want to do something different. Because in our community, we have to absolutely respect our elders. It's like when you go to an elder in the black community, you say, what are we? And they be like, girl, we Choctaw, we this, we that. And then, you know what I mean? Because they don't know, because they're a descendant of enslaved people. So they can only tell you what somebody told them. But in America, you don't know who people are, honestly. You know, so that's how I tend to use the ACEs, and why it is so important to really consider when you're talking to someone and they're from a different background, not to assume that they are you. Even though we're all human beings, the human experience is very different for each of us, depending on how you look, what your complexion is, how your hair is shaped, if you're tall or big. You know, I thought you could never be a stewardess because I was too big, not like I wanted to be, and all the stewardess were skinny. Now I've seen some stewardesses that are big. So you know what I'm saying? But imagining somebody's thing, when somebody's telling you can't be something because of something, that's reflective. So any questions, any comments from the audience? Because that's the best way I can lay out that ACEs survey when I looked at it. Yo, males, yes, it's really basically the same thing, even for males. In terms of, thank you, she said African American men amongst males. It's pretty much the same thing, and a lot of it too is cultural. It's really the same thing. It's the same thing around getting a job, or the way people see you, or having this fear. You know, it's kind of like I see with a lot of boys in classes. I go to a lot of hearings around behavioral. Most of them are African American. You may see some brown people in there, but mainly African American. And it's usually someone's being afraid of, well, he stood up. Well, John stood up, and you didn't say nothing when John stood up and kicked the phone across the room and fell out. And you just say, John, take a seat. But when Raheem did it, it was like, oh my God, I thought he was gonna hit me. Like, to us, that's some of the things we experience in our own culture, that we don't want to talk about, our own fear of what we think of someone, even though we don't have anything on record where a whole bunch of black people went into a whole bunch of white people's neighborhoods and did stuff to it. I've just never seen that on record. And maybe it is, I just, you know. But I just know that that's something in terms of even African-American males, it's the fear of who we think they are. And as a black mother, talk about the ACEs, if you have a black son, you should be scared to death. I mean, just in general, just with all the things coming at the black male. So anything you want to add on about the black male? Because that's just what I see, just in terms of, to me, in our community, we don't do a lot of dividing, because usually when something happens to a black male, it's usually the black female that's going into the streets on it. Black Lives Matter was started by black women because of all the death that were happening with black men. So to me, it's really the same thing.
Can you talk, both of you, talk a little bit about the Trayvon issue, the hoodie, the walking in a gated community, the getting in the, being black, driving in a car, and what the kids have to worry about, what their parents have to worry about?
I think that Trayvon Martin, which is a real tragedy, I feel like, to me, is when you look at history and the history of lynchings in America, to me, Trayvon Martin was just about like how it would go down. I mean, I don't know how to get white people to understand when you kidnap someone and you erase their whole existence in terms of who they are as a people, and then you make them become you. And then when they try to go for self to like, oh, I want to wear a hoodie, because he's a young person. Young people come up with styles all the time. Sometimes I don't even know what they're saying. So I have to say, could y'all clarify that for me? But there is something about being young and black where they usually get a lot of push down. Like, I don't want you to be you. I don't want you. And so they're going to rebel because they're young. You know what I'm saying? But to wear a hoodie, I have a lot of friends who are white that wear hoodies. I have a lot of them do drunk stuff, and when the police stop them, they like, calm down. Like, their first thought is not to body slam them on the ground. So I always feel like Trayvon Martin and all the other names, I could be here all day. To me, it reminds me that, for me, that my ancestors are saying it's still the same place. Do not forget what happened to us. And every time we want to forget that the history of America, a case like that happens. And I'm dumbfounded, like, man, I want to believe in this dream, but I've not been able to get there. I love when Tim Wise came last month and he showed that film, White Like Me. I thought it was like, wow, some of the stuff I didn't even know, but I also know white people who didn't even know. That was like all the things that had happened even after slavery. So I don't know how much I can speak to Trayvon Martin, except for he reminds me of history, but we've been experiencing this all of this time. The only difference now is that we have video cameras and now you can see it, but I'm from Philadelphia. I'm from North Philly. And I don't know how I seen what they said about the survey, but I'm from North Philadelphia. And so that's very different. Everybody's not going to take that ACEs survey because to them, this is our culture. This is what we do. This is how I get you to sit down. I mean, that's them trying to hold on to who they think they are, because really at the root of our issue is identity. I don't know who I am. I don't ever want to discuss going down south. We don't ever want to see the South again. I learned so many great traditions in the South. As I revisit, I also work in Mississippi with young people down there that's really struggling with identity. But their culture is a little bit more like people let you know that you are a descendant of a slave, because we still see you as a slave. So that's a little different with Trayvon. You want anything on the Trayvon? So I know you.
Well, I mean, I was just going to add, I had my own interesting experience. Where I grew up was actually pretty culturally diverse, and I've worked in Atlanta and Denver, and so in a lot of ways I felt like, without going through it, I understand what a lot of black youth have been through and adults. And I was speaking with one of my patients, and she was worried about her teenager who I knew. And I said, he's a smart kid. He's not in the wrong place at the wrong time. He's not one of those kids that, granted, he's not a white kid. He may have things that could come his way, but it's not going to be something where he's getting taken down by the police or anything like that. And then when Trayvon happened, I had to kind of really face my naiveness and saying, wow, this fear that a lot of minorities, especially African Americans, have, that a lot of us white folks say, well, it's not like, it used to be like that, but it's changed so much. And so as a therapist, I'm saying, hey, I don't want you to be in this unnatural fear. I mean, it makes sense, but all parents worry about their teens. And I had to think, wow, this isn't just paranoia, this is real. And how many of us white people are just saying, well, I'm not like that, and I wouldn't hold that against that person, and so I'm just not going to look at it in this way, that we're still stuck in this racial space that's inappropriate and no good. Yes? Well, I didn't know if this is part of what I was saying. Anyway, so I think it's really important that we, like I was saying, the way we're approaching things in Marin City, it's on all of us to be culturally sensitive, but it's, we also have to look at what we're working against. It can't be one person's side and saying, well, this is like what you said about disciplining and abuse, or, spanking or corporal punishment. We have to be very careful about the ways that we offer other ways of doing things while honoring what people are doing, and so to come in, especially as a white therapist, and say, oh, well, everything can be great if we do this, and really just flatlining everyone's culture and saying it doesn't matter where you're coming from, just do it this way. And I think for me, that was just it was a wake-up call, because I thought, wow, yeah, your son, just by not being a white kid, he could be in danger at any point, and where do we all meet? Where do we treat that as a reality, and where do we also say, but we can't get stuck there? It is like that, and I'm backing you, and I want us to move in a different direction. And how do we come to terms with all of that? Yes?
I just wanted to add something too. I work with these two guys, and I just Dr. Trayvon and the lynching. We're seeing lynching in a different way every day. Like, we're seeing an assault like Trayvon in a different way in Marin all the time. We have, Rolanda does the Girl Power group, but we have another group that is called the Defenders, in which we work with young black boys in Willow Creek, Bayside MLK, TAM, other schools. And we have to, first of all, I want to say 50% of black boys who start school don't finish. That's a lynching, because there's something, what makes them different. I also want to say what we probably, most of us know, that there were studies that were done to say that we deal build prisons based on the failure of children in elementary school, particularly black children. But in Marin, we have to send a facilitator in to advocate almost for our boys in school who are being suspended more, or when they can't sit down, it's like they're aggressive and there's fear with the teacher. We have actually a person that when our children in our defenders program are in trouble, this advocate is called so that he can sit in the space so our children won't be expelled or suspended, or there's an advocate to sit with them and they can go under behavioral contract and they won't be immediately medicated. One of the big things at our clinic is to try not to medicate children, of which more black children in our area are medicated because their behavior is somehow abnormal when they're being just as bad as any other child in the same situation. So there are things that are happening every day locally that for me feel like the lynching. I'm a parent of a black child who I had to get out of the school system. He graduated early because I reminded him all the time that this is not a safe place for you. Because the longer you stay, the more chance you have at failure, of being labeled, of being medicated, of being looked at different. It is a different world. So I just wanted to point that out.
Thanks. I'm the one that deals with sex trafficking of children, and what I'd like to underscore from what our presenters are saying is that even in the sex trafficking world, emerging statistics are showing that there is an uneven number of brown and black teen girls who are the victims of domestic minor sex trafficking. There's an unprecedented increase from 65% or higher of the victims are black, brown, how they say it, Afro-American teen girls too. So it is still prevalent everywhere.
Hi, thank you. It almost sounds like, it's almost, and I love the concept of sort of reversing it, bring the resilience in, bring the strength-based ideas in from your community, and then from there, sort of start breaking down sort of pieces, and from there, maybe even go a little farther and look sort of at what's happening possibly within an individual family.
I want to say exactly for me, because looking at the history of my family, we've always done that. I mean, that's how we survived slavery. We didn't just say, oh my God, I'm a slave, I'm gonna die. It was like, we're gonna drink water, we're gonna do the best we can, we're gonna take care of each other, we're gonna love each other, we're gonna honor each other, we're gonna just try to make it. And I think, to me, that's part of the American story. For some of us, it's like even when people threw me a curveball, I figured out how to duck it and go around it and create something else, out of what they left. That's how chitlins is so good. Chitlins are pig's intestines. So that was what we left with the pig. We've taken those I don't eat pig, but I'm just saying back in the day, you made it taste real good because that's all that was left, even though it was not. Why would you eat intestines? Like, that's where you get rid of stuff. But if that's all you have, you make do with what you have. So resilience is what I know. Like, I feel like that's in my DNA.
Right, and that's being passed.
Yeah, and that's being passed along. Thank you.
Has ACEs been of any assistance to either of you in dealing with the gang problems, and particularly with the male end of gang problems that we're experiencing here in the Bay Area and I guess around the country?
Yeah. Well, I could just say, one of the things, when I look at ACEs, and what we see is these happen to, it happens to everybody. But what's important is, what's the behavior that comes after it? How do we deal with it? How does it manifest? How do we deal with it? So you're looking at gangs being an extension of the trauma that happened, and how do we deal with it? If we're able to commune together against the forces that are outside here, like the first presenter had said, if smoking cigarettes has a calming effect, and then someone tells me it's no good, am I going to stop smoking? You know, so to tell people that being violent and doing these things is causing yourself or your culture to look bad or any of these things, we're not actually honoring all that they've been through and what it provides. And, you know, I think that's one of the things I've noticed when we're trying to do therapy, particularly with African American men, is I don't have the answer for what you need. So don't come to me and I'm going to tell you what you need. It starts with just trusting me. You know, I have to realize that a lot of trauma that's happened, like you said, came from slavery. I had a guy that came in 2 weeks ago, older African American that was a vet, and he said, I had all these things go down white people did to me when I was in the military. I don't trust them. And I'm sitting there thinking, and you're coming to me for help? So I said to him, you know, I have to point out that I'm also a white guy. Is this going to actually work? Can you be? And he said, oh, yeah, I've already talked to people about you. I know about you. I said, oh, okay. But the point was that I can't just say, well, I have this information, so you're screwed up because you have this many things going on. And he's not going to come in and say, could you please fix me? I'm going to give everything to you. It's a mutual respect and trust, you know. And so if we want things to change for people, if we want them to seek out other ways of health, because the gang is supportive, if we want to pick things that are supportive that aren't going to end them up in prison, or then we need to offer things that are actually offering something different that still feels supportive and feels that it's going to make their life resilient. And so it comes to getting people to trust. In Marin City, one of the ways we've done that is kind of working backdoor through working with teens and working with moms and working with people that are in the church that then say, hey, you know what? These guys over here are okay. When you go in there and you tell them what's going on, they're not going to go and take data down for the white university up the way so that we can put you in a data magazine. We're here to listen to what's going on and really collaborate and have trust there. And is it the solution to everything? No, but it's where we're starting and it's where we're seeing change. So.
Somebody weigh in.
Hi, I have a question for both of you because I'm not sure I would get the same answer. And it's kind of two-part. Do you think people, African Americans in particular in the community that we're talking about, are aware of the amount of stress and trauma they're experiencing every day? And our children, our youth, are they aware of how much stress and trauma they're experiencing themselves on a daily basis?
Yeah. I can say that the stress that community in which you're talking to me is like every black community, depending on, you know, where you are. I think yes, because it's a part of our design. We are so used to working in places where we're stressed out, people seeing us a certain way, white people got all the answers, got to beg them for stuff. I mean, that's everywhere. I mean, but I also think sometimes it's kind of like when you're diabetic and you're trying to get your numbers down to 120, but you've been operating at 400 or 300, which you should probably be dead. So, you know, and then when the doctor gets you down to 120, you almost feel lightheaded because you're like, wow, this is where I'm supposed to be, but I've been at 400 for like years. So I feel like in every community, it feels like, particularly the one that's in Marin City, of course they know that it's stressed out because they're trying to figure out how to navigate in that world. Because usually when you go in to ask for something, you have to deal with all of these stereotypes of who people think you are. You know, when you're talking to your kids about being stopped by the police, you want to tell them to trust the police, but then you know the police may not trust them. Like you have to constantly be at battle with people. It's like you can't even go to sleep on these people. That's how you feel. You feel like you're in the battle zone. Like, you know, I can't go to sleep because if I go to sleep, then something else may happen. So I feel like, I think they're aware of it. I think the young people are aware of it to a point, but I also think they're trying to also be normal and have all the gadgets, but that's not going to help change their outcome. But they'll do it anyway. So I think it really depends. I mean, I definitely, the answer to your question for me is yes, but I think they're trying to figure out how do we get to be normal, but what we think is normal is really not normal. It's an illusion almost. Do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would agree that of course, people understand the level of stress they're going through. You know, I mean, this is why they don't want to get out of bed some days, or they want to go home and go to bed, or drink alcohol when they get home. To me, one of the things that becomes important is, what is this doing to us? Okay, so it's stress. We all say, oh, wow, I was stressed today. If one more thing happens to me, but what does that mean? If one more thing happens to me, am I gonna end up in a locked up facility, or is it I'm just not gonna be able to handle the rest of the day? Am I gonna end it? And so ACE is really, it gives us the responsibility to do something about it now, but it also takes away some of that blame and says, look, you were dealt a hand with all of this stuff. Now do something about it. You know, we can say, okay, well, I'm in this position because I have 7, I have 8 ACEs, but now what do I do with it? So I think this is the part that I was saying earlier. How do we educate in a way that's not just saying, dang, you have 8? We're going for like 6. People have 6 or less because we don't know what to do about you once you're over 6. Instead, we say, okay, here's a score, and here are all the ways you can depend on your family, on your community, on your schools, on your work. How do you deal with this stress? How do you manage it? It's not, otherwise it's a doomsday scenario, you know? Well, you scored really high. If you wouldn't have put that one extra one, you might have made it through, but that one you decided was an extra score. So it's really important to help people actually think about how is stress impacting them. Because if they don't, they're just going to try to escape it through alcohol, drugs, any way possible. I think it's empowering when we start to say, it's kind of like the idea of, sorry to the moms, I know yesterday was Mother's Day, but I'm screwed up because of my mom or my dad. It's always it's our parents. Okay, that's great. So are we stuck in this the rest of our life? Or do we say, wow, these things created behaviors, habits that are not helpful. Now what do I do? And that's where, if we can collaborate together, understanding your stress level and what to do about it starts to change your whole experience.
Thank you so much, Karuna and Rolanda. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for your patience. We're going to try to scoot right along. Now we are going to hear from providers from Marin Community Clinics, Karen Schmidt and Andrea Parsons.
Hello. Thank you guys so much for having us today. Again, my name is Andrea. This is Karen. We're from the Marin Community Clinics, behavioral health providers there. And we're going to be talking today about specifically the Latino population in the Canal District of San Rafael, which is pretty close to here, which is primarily composed of low-income new immigrant and first-generation Latino individuals. So I'm going to start by talking about the common experiences of the new immigrant population. One of the most frequent reports that we hear from our patients is about the abandonment that they feel by one or both of their parents. Many parents come to the United States for economic opportunity, given that in a number of Latin American countries, the necessities that people have for school or medical care are things that need to be paid for up front. And so it's just not feasible with the work that's available there. The other alternative is to go to work in the major cities, which takes one or both parents away from the home for weeks to months at a time. So children in these situations are left with relatives, with neighbors, even another parent who also has to work full-time, which leaves them alone a lot of the times and really vulnerable to physical and emotional neglect and all forms of abuse. When we see children, when they come to us as patients, then they can able to kind of rationally understand the reason why their parents came to this country and the best intentions that they had for them. However, they really do blame most of their traumatic experiences on growing up without their parents. Domestic violence is equally as prevalent in many of these countries. This alone is a very significant trauma, as children definitely lose their sense of protection and security within the home. And most of the time, I won't say most, many times, they often repeat or suffer the same kind of violence in their futures as well. And not only, is that alone a trauma, but it can lead to parental separation and kind of the consequences that we discussed with the initial point there and the abandonment by the parents. Complicating this further is the absence of law enforcement to protect victims of domestic violence. So when these people are suffering abuse in their homes, they go to the authorities and are pretty much told that these are family matters and need to be dealt with within the home. So then these victims are not left with any recourse or any way to protect themselves. They end up staying in these relationships, and children are exposed to this violence throughout the course of their childhoods. Corporal punishment is another pretty common practice in Latin American countries. As our last presenters were talking about, a lot of victims do see this punishment, especially when it's very severe, as a form of physical abuse. And at the same time, a lot see it as something that was necessary and actually a positive experience for them. It made them hardworking and honest people today. And so this is one reason that they kind of lament the really stringent parenting rules that we have here in the United States and say that they actually might create a lot of the major challenges that children face. So it's a reason that it continues into future generations, along with a number of other reasons that we're going to discuss a little bit later in the presentation as well. Another unique kind of cultural characteristic that can set the foundation for ACEs is something called machismo, which is this idea that men are superior to women in most ways, and kind of need to put women in their proper place. And this is an antiquated notion that's really adopted from previous generations and from societal pressures as well, that can lead to domestic violence, infidelity, and sexual abuse of girls. Not only do familial dynamics play a role in development of ACEs, but also kind of greater societal forces. The effect of gangs and drug cartels in these countries cannot be understated. Not only is there violence kind of on the streets and in people's backyards, essentially, and extortion that occurs on a monthly basis, sometimes they call rent, but gangs start soliciting boys as young as 12 years old to either join them under threat of death, either them or their families. They also take girls around that age, 12 or a little bit older, as wives or sex slaves. So what happens is kids end up dropping out of school in order to stay home and avoid going outside altogether, so they don't confront these gangs in these situations. They either leave the country as well if their families can afford it, or they join the gang, feeling that they need to protect their families, and they end up involved in drugs and violence, and often end up being incarcerated or killed themselves. And if children are lucky enough to be able to kind of avoid this trap, they do see it happen to a number of their immediate family members. Again, most of these countries are also ravaged by civil war and corrupt government officials like we were talking about, including the police force. And a lot of our patients, especially those of indigenous origins, have experienced really extreme discrimination, enslavement a lot of times, genocide as well, and abandonment by the people in power who are supposed to be there to protect them. And so this kind of chaotic environment, this absence of law and order in these countries does set the stage for even more prevalent and powerful gang activity. If people are actually able to save enough money or borrow enough money, which they often do, to be able to make the journey to the United States, the crossing itself can be an extremely traumatic experience. They come with only what they can carry, with sandals, improper shoes, and clothing, and really suffer a lot: hunger, cold, extreme cold and heat, illness and injury, and rout. There are wild animals. They get debilitating blisters, dehydration, things that don't allow them to continue with the journey. Some actually do die en route. Other ones are picked up, kind of stop the crossing and picked up by immigration and deported. We hear stories all the time of our patients coming in after they're recently arrived of being kidnapped at some point during the journey. Their families extorted for thousands of dollars in order to let them go, and being raped and sometimes witnessing murder as well. And children who are picked up are often separated from their adult relatives. They have a little bit better chance of getting into the United States. However, the adult relatives are sent back home, they're deported. The children are kept in something called a casa hogar, usually in Texas or Arizona, for a number, 6 to 8 weeks at a time until they can locate somebody in the United States who is able to take guardianship of them. So that separation is also extremely traumatic for them. Finally, the people that we work with, the new immigrants, have had limited access to behavioral health and substance abuse services. These, in many Latin American countries, are situated solely in the major cities, are very, very expensive to access, and there's that strong stigma that only crazy people go to therapy. Sadly, when they get here, if they are able to get here, many don't have access to these services as well, especially over 18-year-olds. Mostly due to lack of insurance. However, in this kind of current political climate right now, there's even a fear of just going outside and coming to the clinic. Our patients are hearing these news reports of parents being detained while their kids are at school, while they're waiting for work, or even in safe places like schools and clinics. And so even just bracing going outside for anything that's not absolutely necessary, facing going back to all these things that we're talking about is a huge source of anxiety and re-traumatization for our patients. If they're not getting access to services, their needs are going unmet and they're being coped with in these survivalist but very unhealthy ways that you've been hearing about, and that's obviously going to affect how they're going to raise and interact with their children, the first generation Americans. So a common thread that you've been hearing about throughout the presentations is the fact that trauma can be transmitted through the generations. That is the intergenerational trauma. You've heard about the biological changes that can occur in the brain due to the toxic stress of the trauma, which can even pass through the DNA. The other half of this phenomena are the characteristics that are exhibited in behaviors as a result of these changes. That's your low frustration tolerance, your emotional reactivity, and your poor coping skills, specifically self-medication of the trauma with drugs and alcohol, and acts of self-harm. These traits often make individuals who are traumatized more vulnerable to perpetrating physical and verbal abuse, emotional neglect, domestic violence, and sometimes sexual abuse as well, though this is less common. Those who have experienced abuse as children are much more likely also to be re-traumatized as adults for reasons that you've heard about, making them less likely to recognize danger when it does present itself, and therefore less able to keep themselves safe. As a result, many of our children who are born to new immigrants in the Canal District are very susceptible to ACEs. There are complicating factors, psychosocial complicating factors, that are only going to increase the vulnerability of this specific population for both cultural and religious reasons, and for history of trauma as well. Actually, many parents do struggle to communicate openly with their children about sex. They implore them to wait until marriage, wait until college at least, focus on their education, and remain abstinent. And so adolescents are not getting the right information to be able to understand, respect, and keep their bodies safe, and are not being given easy access to birth control. With this new GOP healthcare proposal, the problem is only going to kind of get worse. Due to their maturity levels, pregnant teens are also maturity levels, underdeveloped coping skills, and also unstable relationships during that time. The teens are also more likely to develop perinatal depression and anxiety, which can then lead to mood and behavioral problems in the children, and again perpetuate this cycle of ACEs and abuse. Living in poverty, where the parents are having to work multiple jobs at a time, and where families are sharing apartments with many other individuals, sometimes known but oftentimes not, also sets the stages specifically for physical neglect and for sexual abuse. Furthermore, only being able to afford to live in really dangerous communities is going to expose children to further gang violence, to drug culture, incarceration, and death as well. As we know, most immigrant parents are doing absolutely everything they can to be able to provide for their children. They're working multiple jobs, they're finding apartments in the safest place that they can. However, without this guarantee of many of the social protections that we as residents and citizens take for granted, like minimum wages, paid sick leave, even landlord protections, it's incredibly difficult for them to be able to kind of give the kind of healthy and safe environment for the children that are going to be able to protect them from developing these ACEs. Finally, a major concern nowadays is the parents' or guardians' legal status. Children are seeing their parents incarcerated and even deported, usually for things like not driving with a license, which obviously is really hard to get when if you take a day off of work, you're not going to get paid for that day, you're not going to make rent, and if you don't speak or read in English. When they're driving under the influence, again, we see the self-medication of their own personal trauma that's coming out in these behaviors, and following an episode of domestic violence, again, with the same cycle continuing that they're going to be penalized for. Children often communicate the shame at having to live in fear of immigration, in the shadows, so to speak, feeling that they and their families are less than and worth less than their counterparts, their resident counterparts. And they also are hesitant to reach out for support many times because of their own personal experiences or experiences of their parents of institutional racism. Unfortunately, we're also seeing an increase in bullying in schools specific to legal status, with kids, kindergartners, first graders, threatening to deport their fellow students or their parents because of their legal status. With the new federal policies and this very nationalistic rhetoric that we're seeing kind of run rampant in the country at this time, the resident children are just absolutely terrified of being separated from their immigrant parents, and that's impacting their ability to concentrate and be successful in school, to just kind of enjoy, you know, day-to-day kid activities, and to kind of function on a daily basis. With this in mind, I'm going to turn to Karen. She's going to give a case example of one of our patients who kind of highlights a majority of these issues.
Hi. Okay, so I am going to talk about Maria. Which one? Oh, it's weird. It shows two different. Sorry, it shows two different screens on here. I'm confused. Okay, Maria is a 5-year-old recent immigrant from Guatemala. She presented to our clinic within a month of her arrival to the U.S. Her mother brought her to her pediatrician because she was refusing to eat and could only sleep if she was in her mother's arms. Maria was also avoiding attending school. Upon assessment, several ACEs were identified. Maria and her family had fled the violence in Guatemala, and in doing so, left behind her beloved grandmother, who had been her primary caretaker, for much of the reasons Andrea just illustrated. During the process of immigrating to the United States, she witnessed her parents handcuffed and forcibly removed from her. The family remained separated for 17 days in a detention center. It's unknown during this time if additional trauma might have occurred to her in terms of abuse, but we do know for sure that she did not understand what was occurring and did believe she was never going to see her family again. When we saw her, sorry, let's just plop these all here. Her mother had an ankle bracelet and had a deportation hearing scheduled for the following week. ICE raids were occurring frequently in the neighborhood, and her whole family was staying in one room of an apartment, and they were being evicted the following week. Maria reported that she couldn't eat because the food didn't taste like it did in Guatemala, and she couldn't sleep or leave for school due to her fear that her parents would be taken by ICE. She was also having nightmares about the experiences in the detention center. Additionally, once we found her a school and got her settled, she ended up being subjected to racially targeted bullying in the school. Her peers were calling her dirty. They were physically attacking her, and they made her crawl on her hands and knees and be a slave to other students. All of this, and she was 5 years old. And this is happening in Marin. And this little girl was actually quite better resourced than many of the patients we see. She immigrated with both parents. There was no abuse within her household. Many of the patients we see immigrate with only one parent or none at all, often have domestic violence, leaving their home country and being separated from their parents for years. So she was actually one of our more resourced kiddos. Okay, so what are we doing about it? I know we talk a lot about the trauma-informed system here at MCC. We really are striving to have trauma-informed care environment that's sensitive and just supportive of our patients' needs. All of our staff are well-versed in ACEs and their effects, and we're monitoring our patients who are most at risk. We have an at-risk OB panel. We have well child visits, dental visits, expert screenings to check for substance abuse. In addition, much of our staff speaks Spanish, and we have interpreter lines available to meet any language need to ensure that our patients receive care in their primary language. We have also integrated behavioral health services into our clinic. So our behavioral health providers are working side by side with medical providers. And we've done this to reduce the stigma of behavioral health that's felt in many Latino communities. We've done it to eliminate the barriers to treatment, such as transportation or taking time off work, and to be able to intervene right away. When our medical providers identify a patient with or at risk of ACEs, they can refer to our team, and we can provide the initial stages of trauma treatment, as well as connect them to resources. We've expanded our services to include the treatment of children, and so our behavioral health providers work with both children and adults, and we provide individual and group therapy. Our groups are also aimed at reducing the effects of ACEs. At any given time, we have several groups available. We're currently running Seeking Safety groups in Spanish and English, and we have a teen stress group where we focus on stress rather than ACEs. And we're also going to be running a series of groups this summer aimed at new arriving teens, and they're going to be providing resources, support, and skills for teens who've recently immigrated to the U.S. We also do what we call warm handoffs, which is when a medical provider asks us to see a patient directly within the medical visit to assess and intervene immediately when there's a clinical concern, so we can provide seamless care, as well as collaborate with our PCPs and the medical treatment. We also have a patient navigator and behavioral health medical assistants, and they're able to help connect our patients to resources including legal, housing, education, food, transportation. Our patient navigator is really able to walk the extra mile with our patients through each step of the process. And if any of you have come across Hannah, you know that she's pretty amazing. Our providers also work with the schools and local agencies to make sure that our patients are receiving all the services they need, and we coordinate care with several local agencies represented here. So how did this work for Maria? Maria was seen by her pediatrician, who gathered enough information within her well child visit to be alerted to her trauma exposure and ACEs risk, and I was able to see her directly as a warm handoff and gather additional information and provide immediate interventions and resources for her. We focused on the immediate interventions for eating and sleeping, as well as addressing the trauma symptoms. We also were able to connect her to legal resources, housing resources, and our patient navigator and behavioral health MA were able to continuously follow up to ensure that these services were in place. She did start eating immediately after leaving our office. Her acute stress symptoms subsided shortly thereafter. Mom has a lawyer working on her case, and they moved into stable housing, and her school responded wonderfully to us advocating with them, and she's no longer receiving any of the bullying that she had before, and she's now in a pretty supportive environment. The whole family continues to receive services at MCC, so we get to continue to provide resources as needed and check in on her, and right now she's doing really well. So, what are we doing to prevent additional ACEs and negative health outcomes? So one thing for sure that we've talked about here today are establishing safe environments. One way we do that is to help establish those environments at home. We work with the parents, we do family therapy, lots of psychoed on establishing safe and predictable home environments within the resources that they have, as well as talking about corporal punishment and other possible ways to discipline children within a cultural context of understanding that this is what they do, and they do not see this as abuse, and we don't either. It's just there are other ways that we could do this as well, and really working within that framework. Our site also has to be a safe environment, and so we provide legal information, the Know Your Rights red cards and handouts, established a clinic protocol for how to handle ICE if they come to our clinics so that we can ensure the safety of our patients, because this has been an increased concern, and our patients in recent months have declined attendance for fear of showing up and having ICE be there. We also do preventative groups where we combine a behavioral health provider and a medical provider, and these groups focus on, we have one on diabetes, one on chronic pain, stress management groups, nutrition groups for kids, and we have partnered with JFCS to have triple P parenting groups so that our parents can learn more positive parenting strategies and reduce this perpetuation of ACEs. And since we understand the importance of establishing safe environments for children to prevent ACEs, we have several programs that aim to start with pregnancy as well.
Like Karen said, it's really important to be able to address these issues before the babies are even with us. So she had mentioned that our obstetrics team does keep a high-risk list of the patients who have a lot of potential trauma factors or other risk factors involved. And we develop a multidisciplinary action plan to be able to address many of those issues. So for the high-risk patients, we meet twice a month in the mornings and be able to talk in person to share ideas for potential interventions, to schedule warm handoff appointments during the OB visits, and to be able to address mental health or logistical barriers to receiving care. And there are also a number of resources that we have both within and outside the clinic to service this particular population. We have centering and new moms groups. There are parent-child therapy, brief therapy, free doulas, WIC, lactation specialists, case managers, and then our integrated behavioral health system. And this is our final slide, and the most important one. So what can we do to be able to kind of collaborate and go from here? There's always more that we can and that we should do to be able to address the needs of the Latino community, both pregnant and not pregnant. For example, our postpartum women only have access to emergency Medi-Cal, which does cover the behavioral health services for 6 weeks after the delivery. And that's really unfortunate. Many of the perinatal or postpartum depressive symptoms won't come up until after that 6-week point. Even if they do, they're going to last probably a lot longer than 6 weeks. The biggest problem is that we are extremely impacted, and to be able to get more than one appointment in for these patients during that 6-week period is really, really difficult. So after that point, they're really left with no affordable and viable options for treatment of their mood disorders, which we all know kind of where that continues on into the future. In Marin County in general, options for uninsured patients are extremely sparse. Wait lists are very long. Follow-up appointments are occurring every 3 to 5 weeks instead of every 1 to 2 weeks, which would be much more ideal. And we know of only one other provider in the San Rafael area or Canal area that is able to see uninsured patients, and she is just as slammed as we are. I was telling Karen last week that 2 of my physician providers actually came up to me and said, we are referring every single one of our patients to you because they can really, really see the emotional impacts of these patients' trauma on their physical health. And they know that nothing is going to get cured physically if they're not able to access the mental health services that they need. So our current system to be able to care for these very complex traumas that these patients are presenting is just unfortunately inadequate and needs to be bolstered in any way that we can find possible.
So along those lines, we need additional providers and services. As Andrea mentioned, we're always swamped with how many people we could see and trying to get everybody in as quickly as possible. We especially need more bilingual, bicultural providers. We're actively recruiting right now, but there's always a need more than we can fund. In terms of additional services, the biggest one for our patients is housing. Our patients are often living in cramped, unsafe conditions, leaving them more vulnerable to ACEs. Just last week, I had a 17-year-old patient who came in and told me he was homeless. And despite using every spare moment and all of our resources to connect him to an agency, which we did connect him to, he and his mom still had to leave my office without a safe place to sleep that night. Case management is essential, and our patients have so many needs in terms of the legal, housing, school, et cetera. And they often don't speak the language, which makes it even more difficult to navigate these already complicated systems. Having someone to help them through the process has been essential for so many of our patients, but we have one patient navigator for 35,000 patients. It's obviously not enough. And all of our PCPs and our behavioral health providers do as much case management as we can. We call schools, we're on there. But under the current model, we're not reimbursed for case management, and we don't have the time or the manpower to do nearly as much as we need to. In our spirit of integrated care, we think co-location of services is the way to go. We want to be able to offer as many services to our patients in one place as possible. With all the amazing programs and supporters represented here today, it'd be wonderful to forge more partnerships. We want to continue to break down these barriers and to provide all the services that our families need. That's going to take all of us working together toward that aim, and both for the benefit of the individuals and the families and for our community as a whole. So we hope to be able to work together more. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Karen and Andrea. Thank you. We're bringing our youth panel up. Here's Dana.
We're going to run up. My name is Dana Pep. Thank you for staying, because this is actually one of the most awesome parts of the whole morning. This youth panel is talking about resiliency, and I'm going to talk as they run into their seats. Why are some young people more resilient than others, and what can we do as a community to help all of our young people be more resilient and achieve their dreams? What we're going to do right now is you're going to hear from these fabulous young people. They're going to share their stories in about 2 minutes, and then we'll have time for Q&A. And I really hope that you can hear stories and reflect on what we can do as a community. Ray, Vince, Carmen, Laura, who wants to go first? Are you all right? All right, Ray.
Yeah, so I'm Ray Martinez. I'm part of Opening the World now. Growing up, there was a lot of troubles. Parents weren't home, always working, kind of like what they had mentioned. Always cramped up, always moving, not really any support ever. One thing that did help, when I was in the juvenile justice system, I was sent to a group home, and I always had counselors, always had therapists. They always said that they were there for me, they wanted to help me, but it never really sounded genuine. But when I was in my group home, my probation officer, Jeff Verzi, sat me down one time and just told me that I'm here for you. If you ever need to talk to someone, just call me. And every time I called him, he'd come out and see me. He'd take the long drive, go all the way out there, and talk to me like he said he would. And that forever changed me, because I saw that someone actually supported me. And like, my mom was there, my dad was there sometimes. They're supportive, but they're always gone, so that support didn't really count for too much. But just being able to be there for someone, even though they don't know you, goes a really long way. So with that being said, here's the next guy.
All right, so this is very hard sometimes, but my name is Vincent Chu. Might not look like a youth. I am a youth. I'm 28 years old. One of the things that I guess that made me the way I am is because I'm proud. I'm very happy that I was part of ACES. If it wasn't for those ACES, it wouldn't make me who I am today. At 10 years old, I was initiated into triads in Southeast Asia. So I was part of triads when I was in Malaysia. At the age of 12, I was born in New York, but at the age of 12, I left my parents, mom and dad, from Malaysia, and I moved to the United States with me and my brother. living at those circumstances, I was living with relatives and living with relatives. And what's funny about this is because one of the therapists is actually sitting amongst y'all. I was helping her move, and one day she mentioned me a question. She broke me down, and finally I admit to her that at the age of 14, I was molested by my own auntie when I was living in New York. So I want to thank her for that. You know, I always going to remember that moment when she broke me down and forced me to understand what happened to me. At the age of 16 and a half, I was incarcerated in Rikers Island State Prison in New York because I was an adult in New York at the age of 16 for crimes that I didn't even do because it's my third arrest. You know, I spent time in county jail, booking centers, and I ended up in Rikers Island for 5 months. And that was the last time I swore to myself that I will get put behind bars. Fast forward to that, you know, because of survival mode in New York, I have to be part of gangs and learned a lot, seen a lot, still do. Till this day, I still go through a lot. The resiliency that I am, that make me who I am today, is because a lot of nonprofits and a lot of elected officials here in this county see something in me that they gave me a helping hand. If it wasn't because of all those safety net they provided me, or whatever the tools and resources they provided me, I won't be here because I was supposed to be dead before the age of 25. So, you know, fast forward all the way to now, I have my associate's degree, working towards bachelor's, and currently I am working as a campus supervision at Davidson Middle School, and, you know, I actually trying to get my bachelor's too so I could become a counselor. Other than that, you know, appreciate you guys for coming.
Thanks, Vince.
Hi, my name's Carmen Ringer, and I'm 26 years old, and I grew up in Marin County for the most part, and I scored very high on the ACEs. I think I missed one. So I have a lot of death and trauma in my family. My sister drowned in front of me when I was 4 years old. Both my parents have mental illness and drug and alcohol issues. So that transcended into my life, and I've been able to turn it around by joining a program called Opening the World. It's a travel and service program here in Marin County, and I've been a part of that for 5 years. I also managed a restaurant that I was at for 6 years. I got promoted to general manager by the age of 21 and managed 30 employees at the Northgate Mall. I was able to do things like that, and I also work for restorative justice through the YMCA. And I wait tables at night, and I was able to do that partially because I was tired of going down the path of my parents, so I wanted to change. And also I had a lot of resources, like Adoptive Family would give me gifts for Christmas. Big Sister Big Brothers program hooked me up with a big sister when I was 7 years old, and we're still in contact today. I was in the foster care system, and yeah, so I've had a lot of resources, including therapy, and doing self-care. Like I practice yoga and meditation, and I try to eat healthy and things like that. So thank you for being here and listening to me. I get nervous public speaking, but this isn't about me. This is about maybe my story could help someone in this room. So thank you.
Thank you, Carmen.
Hello, my name is Laura Narcisse. I'm 22 years old. Since we're telling our ages, I might as well. I can relate to a lot of the presentations. I immigrated from Haiti when I was about 4 years old, so a lot of the first generation, I'm a 1.5er technically. I understand. Around 12 years old, my dad, ironically on a way to a funeral of a family friend, had a brain aneurysm, was able to pull over the car with my aunt, went into a coma, and died a couple months later. And then a couple years after that, my grandma passed away. She was an alcoholic for a really long time. I was separated from my mother because I've always been in a single-parent household for a majority of my life, and the way I dealt with my trauma was there were a lot of resources available to me. I took advantage of some of them. I internalized a lot, and I focused academically and surface, and it got really intense academically. And through after-school programs like AVID, Making Waves, Youth Court, when I was 17, Dawn, who fortunately left, made a very big impact in me, because as I started getting older, I had staff members and community members that taught me that there aren't bad people, there are bad choices, and that at any point in time that I had support, that I could always do with something different and have a different outcome. Being a young Black woman in Marin, there's a lot of perspectives or things that people automatically assume about you when they see you. I saw that at 13, 14 years old, and I decided that I didn't want to be a statistic. And through that, I've been able to get through community college, get my associates. I got into UC Berkeley recently, and I've learned that even though I was at risk for a really long time, that the things that made me who I am are important, because I can inspire and talk to other Lauras and Carmens and Rays and Vinces. So thank you.
And we have time for questions. So instead of me going blah, 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 why don't we hear questions from the audience? Michelle's going to run the mic. Who has a question for any of our panelists? A zillion questions.
Your question.
Anyone? No questions? Yes, ma'am.
So now that you know about ACEs and trauma and everything like that, how do you think the best way to use this with other kids? What's the best way? Is it useful to teach other kids about this? And if so, how?
Well, it's useful for me because I work in a school setting. On the same hand, it's also good to teach other kids about it. But one problem I have is that, there's a lot of Latino newcomers that comes from whatever country they come from and come to Marin. They learn all this stuff. They have to be the interpreter for their parents already. So they already have that power that I have to translate for my parents. So if we give them the power of this to know that ACEs, that would give them, I'm gonna talk, teacher, don't you understand? I'm going through ACEs. It's a good and a bad. It's a blessing and a curse. Coming from me, working in a school setting, knowing that I was one of those kids before, so it's good to inform them, but to what certain point that they won't misuse those as excuses, or whatever case may be.
I would say the ACEs helped me because a lot of the stuff growing up I thought was normal. So this is the second time I've taken the ACEs, and I feel like it's a good thing because I'm like, wow, there's a lot that happened, and that's why I do some of the behaviors that I do. But by no means did that end my struggle. I still deal with daily issues of anxiety and depression today, but now I have the coping mechanisms. So I think it's good to provide the ACEs and also provide the resources what we're doing here today.
Yeah, I definitely think it's important because the whole trauma-informed perspective and approach when I was younger, what worked for me were having adults that didn't just criticize, that actually sat down and talked to me and wanted to know who I was beyond a classroom. I struggled a little bit in school, and so I had key professors at key parts of my life that sat down with me and actually inquired more about me and my home life and didn't come from a, what are you doing wrong and why don't you get this approach? So I feel like just having that perspective can change the dynamic between parent, teacher, student, and open up the channels to talk about it, just knowing it.
So thank you very much. So I'm hearing the word resources, and could you guys maybe, and I've heard some of the resources you've mentioned, like restorative justice and OTW, can you guys just maybe sort of list out some? Because I feel like there's so many, I want to hear more about what these resources are.
Well, the resource, because of all the experiences that I've gone through, I've been a homeless youth before. Pretty much everything that you could name, I live a lifetime by the time I'm age 19, 18 years old. So it's at a point that all those resources, there's really none. All I did to myself is that, I take parts of what I learned from all the adults and make it my own. So I'm beating up all the adults' brains one by one, from Don Carney to CEO to Terry to Maureen Sidonian to me meeting Steve Kinsey, Charles McGlash, and all these different people. I beat up all the adult brains and make my own and make them Vince. So I'm picking brains from everyone and making my own resources.
Vince, remember when people were keeping you so busy, shuttling you from one activity to another to keep you out of trouble?
Yeah.
I think this one wants to know, what were all those great resources pushing you in so you didn't?
So when I first moved over here, pretty much when I went to Novato, I went to San Marin. I disliked that school, and I still kind of feel some way about it. But I graduated from Novato. The only reason why I graduated from Novato High School is because the school counselor, Eve Cooper, she got me into that because I was part of this Marine Education Fund program before it became 10,000 Degrees. So because I was part of this Marine Education Fund program, instead of sending me to Marine Oaks, because of the relationship that I have, I was managed to be at a traditional high school graduating, which is Nevada High School. In Nevada High School, I was 80 credits behind to graduate on time and to even walk on stage. So what they made me was, I was the only senior that had 0 periods all the way to the 7th period. And within 0 to 7th period, I have to take an internship with MCOE. So thanks to Mary Jane Burke working with me, that they allowed me to be part of this ROP program. And after this ROP program, I will work with College of Marin, which, thanks to staff at College of Marin, they managed to give me an independent study class that I have to take alongside, using internet. And throughout that, because I took the ROP class, I had to go to an internship. So thank you to Youth Leadership Institute that now I have Youth Leadership, I have that. So through Youth Leadership Institute, I get to meet all these other community partners, such as Don, such as CEO, such as Terry. So I was pulled into all these different committees, all of this peer summit, all of this summer stuff. So it's pretty much with one organization, it contacted me to all these organizations, and there's organizations that use me as a poster child, and some of the adults that did it, and I don't get it till now because I got older, but at that time it was all fun and games because here's the money, you talk, we give you some money. Until I grown up, I realized that that's me getting your money for you so you can have more budget, but that's not right. So, long story short, it's just those, I guess, safety net that, made me Resiliency till today.
Other ideas of what organizations helped, any organization in particular or person or strategy that helped you become more resilient?
Just being an opening the world. Janine Curley, she really has a group of us that just are there for each other, support each other. She pushes me to do a lot of things, like speaking out here. A couple years back, I wouldn't speak like this. I wouldn't talk to anybody. I would just be quiet. But with Janine and opening the world, we get to try a lot of new things out. I get to meet a lot of new people. I get to speak out publicly. I get to support others that have gone through the same thing that I've gone through, and just not feel alone. So just being an opening the world is great. I've learned a lot. I've learned a lot.
Go ahead. I had a lot of after-school programs, like college prep programs, and various stages of schooling, like elementary school. There was a program called Making Waves, and it was, doing your homework. My dad worked a lot of shifts. My aunt worked 3 jobs when we were growing up, so I was able to get my homework done. I had help. We had teachers and counselors that can help. AVID was a college prep program that I did in middle school. When I got to high school, there was a lot of peer-centered groups like Youth Court and Gay Straight Alliance and clubs like that were in campus and integrated, so I didn't have to go anywhere else, that had a after-school component. As I got older in college, I got the community service bug, so opening the world, AGS at my community college, which is service-based and academic-based. There's an academic component. So there's like a lot of things that weren't official programs that were integrated into schooling that kept me busy, so I couldn't do other stuff. If I had to get to making waves and do my homework and this was due, I couldn't really go and hang out with such and such at the Snake Park. If you went to Davidson, you know what that means. So,
in your early years, did you choose those programs or
Yeah.
did someone refer you?
I got referred to counseling and certain programs after my dad died in about 6th grade. And because of certain programs, I had the confidence to be able to know that I had those resources available. So it made me more confident to say, I don't want to do this because I can go do this and I can find this place and there's snacks over here. So I don't need to, because snacks always got me when I was younger, to do this. So it kind of went hand in hand. And then as I got older, I just naturally gravitated towards those things. Still do.
I think the biggest resources for me was therapy, because I've been in and out since I was 4 years old, because we all have problems. And so I think everyone can benefit from some sort of therapy, whether it's like energy work or counseling or whatever that looks like. And for me, being of service was a huge key for me, because getting outside of myself and my own issues and giving back to someone else was really big for me. Also, traveling and helping people was always a dream of mine that I never thought that I could do because of finances or whatever. And joining Opening the World, like that was talked about, we all have a story, we all have stuff that we've gone through, traumas that we've been through, and we all come together. And then we all go to like places in the community and out of the community to be of service. Some of us just got back from India and Nepal a few weeks ago, and one of the things that I got most from the program was that I don't feel like a victim anymore because of my circumstances. And that's because, not to dismiss my own issues, but traveling to third world countries where they don't have food, water, healthcare, and things like that, it opens your eyes up to a different world. And then you come back here and you see someone complaining that there's traffic or something like that, and it shifts your perspective. But not to, again, dismiss anyone's issues. It's all based on your life experience.
Thank you. Anyone else? Any other questions?
One last question.
I just want to thank you guys so much. You're all so amazing, so beautiful, and I'm just really, really honored to be able to listen to you tell your stories. As a provider, I'm just kind of wondering, you talked about therapy and other experiences you had. Is there anything that, like, just one thing that stands out in your mind that someone said or did that was like the most helpful? Like, what can we do that just to be present and supportive? That means something different for every person, but I'm just interested to know kind of from your perspective what that means. Sorry, hard question.
Think of one moment, one person that helped you both. One moment, one person, one experience that kind of clicked and said, hey, like for you, maybe your friend, seeing your friend.
Well, the one I would say that when I seen my best friend got killed right in front of me, that pretty much like gave me awakening me and said, this could happen to you too. It happened to your best friend already. It's, I can't say alarming. It's more like it woke me up because he's dead, I'm still here. And now that I'm still here and he's up there, the only reason why I'm doing most of this work is because, you know, he would want me to live for him, not die for him. And when I realized that, like, I got put in this world to live, not to die. Why would I want to die without a mission? I didn't know that until I got to like 24, 25 years old, I would guess.
Let's see. I would say just everyone that comes to you, let them know that you're there, and it seems like you do that already. But for me, like I was saying, my probation officer, I didn't trust this guy. I didn't know him. And anyone that worked with them, I didn't believe anything they said. They said they believed in me. It was usually just a one-time conversation, and I never saw them again. But with this guy, I saw multiple times, and it really showed me that people really do care, and that you're not just someone that is on this earth being ignored all the time. So.
One quote, I love quotes, by the way. One quote that really stuck with me when I was a teenager, I was told that failure won't destroy you, but giving up will. So I could take an exam, let's say, 50 times, but eventually I'm going to pass as long as I don't give up, and that ties into resiliency.
I can't think of a specific time because I have so many of them, and I'm fortunate for that, but the question that always gets me and that always got me with every adult in my life was, how could we get through this, or how can we solve this? There was never a, what are you doing? How can we do this? And immediately that switched the point of view and perspective, and it was inclusive. Just being included and us working through this instead of me working through this eventually kind of broke me down and eventually made me realize that I can do so much more and that I could be a part of something greater than myself. So that's really what kind of did it consistently, though, too. I had a lot of teachers that were, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you to all of our panelists. We really appreciate you sharing your stories. And very powerful. Thank you for being patient and with our running behind schedule. We appreciate you hanging there with us. And thanks to all of you for your patience. I think you stayed for the best part of the day. So again, this is the Marin Communications Forum. If you would like to learn about and be invited to additional events. If you're on our email system at First 5 Marin, you will be invited. Also, you can follow us on Facebook. It's just facebook.com/Marin Communications Forum. And we share not only the details about the events, but we've been sharing a lot of articles this month about ACEs. Next month, on June 19th, we're going to be talking about emergency preparedness and communications in Marin County, just to totally switch subjects. We do that all the time. Join us when you like. Skip it when it doesn't apply to you, but we hope to see you again. And thank you for coming.
Group hug. Group hug. Group hug. Come on.